Something crashed into a multi-story building, and something like a piece of wall flew off to the side. Debris falls down, dust rises from the collision site. A fiery flash appeared above the head of a man who was swinging some kind of weapon that looked like an elongated hammer. This man's eyes are completely white. He is dressed in a brown suit and has protective armbands on his arms. The man stopped in the middle of the rubble. A trail of fire flared up behind him. He raised the weapon above his head and opened his mouth wide in a scream. A magic circle appeared behind him. A huge number of fiery rays fly from above. The man used a meteor strike. Multi-story buildings have collapsed. Many are leaning and are about to fall. There is a lot of dust and small debris in the air. A man with red hair stands and looks at his opponent through a pillar of fire. He asks the question out loud in surprise. The brown-haired man looks at the redhead through the light pole. He holds his hand in front of him, clenched into a fist, with the other grasping her wrist. The man asks Kim Hyun-tae if this is all he has. There is an evil grin on the face of the red-haired man. His eyebrows are furrowed and drawn to the bridge of his nose. The veins on his face are bulging, and beads of sweat are pouring down. He begins to say a phrase, but almost immediately breaks off. The brown-haired man holds a weapon in his hands, from which a green glow emanates. It is reflected in his eyes and illuminates his face. He says it's his turn now. He swings his weapon, leaving a green streak of light in the air. The red-haired man flies back, throwing his arms in the air. The brown-haired man is surrounded by the light from his weapon, his face taking on a serious and concentrated expression. This is the story of an excluded hero. Many different monsters growl furiously. A creature that looks like an animated tree sparkles with yellow eyes. The bear has its mouth wide open, showing long and sharp fangs. Next to them is a brown wolf, which growls, raising its head up, and a large monkey with menacing red eyes. One day, many plants and animals on planet Earth turned into monsters. Monsters of different types move forward in a large group. Some of them have huge branched horns and long tails. Some have wings and the ability to fly. They all look strong and good warriors. Invaders arrive from different dimensions. A young man with sharp, large ears stands with his hand extended in front of him, in which a small yellow ball sparkles. An explosion was heard behind the multi-story buildings, and a large column of fiery smoke rose up. Many houses are destroyed and engulfed in fire, and there is a lot of debris and dust in the area in front of the buildings. And now the world is experiencing an era of great chaos. The young man with a frightened expression on his face sits on the wreckage near the car. A monster with huge fangs is approaching him. The young man asks for help. The monster growls, opening its mouth and revealing its fangs. His eyes glow red. A bright flash of red appears near the creature's muzzle, which strikes the monster. The body of the creature lies on the ground in a pool of its own blood. Next to the carcass stands a man with a sword in his hand. To fight anarchy, humanity created a guild. 5 people stand in the middle of the ruins of the city. An aura of different shades glows around each of them, and they have different weapons in their hands. A guild is a squad of heroes with special abilities. A red-skinned monster with yellow eyes growls furiously with its mouth wide open and fangs bared. He has huge horns and a thick mane. This is the field boss goat Taurus. He swings an axe, intending to attack someone. The goat Taurus is dressed in a loincloth, which is secured to the torso with an unusual belt. The man takes the monster's blow, and a red flash appears around the collision site. Compared to the monster, the man seems very small. The man is clearly tense, trying to hold back the pressure of the monster. Sweat is running down the man's face. His brows are furrowed from effort, and his teeth are clenched tightly. The man's name is Hwang Junho. He is a tank from the Karas Guild. He asks why the Godoris is so strong. Hwang Junho holds the Godor's axe with his shield. The monster's second hand has another weapon. Hwang Junho is very tense. He glances sideways behind his back. The man's eyebrows are drawn to the bridge of his nose, and his sharp cheekbones stand out very strongly. He thinks about how he can't block it. Hwang Junho is joined by another person who takes the blow from the monster's second hand. They stand side by side, Hwang Junho with a shield, and the second man holding off the blow with his weapon. The young man with glasses looks straight ahead at the sight of the collision of 2 weapons. There is a nervous grin on the guy's face, sweat dripping down in large drops. He makes a strangled sound, trying to hold off the attack. This is Yu Jaehan. He is a support and is a member of the Karas Guild. The young man looks to the sides and opens his mouth wide. He clenched one hand into a fist and raised it to the level of his head. He screams, saying that something needs to be done now. A girl with pink hair, dressed in a short skirt and a long-sleeved jacket, holds a staff in front of her, from which a blue glow emanates. The girl hangs above the monster's head, about to attack from behind. She tells Yu Jaehan that she knows. The monster reacts with a surprised roar. The pink-haired girl looks at the pink stone that is on the staff. Her eyes are wide open, as is her mouth, a blue glow engulfing her entire figure. The monster roars furiously, raising its head up. He released the weapon from his hands and raised them to waist level. A blue glow fell on him from above. The girl used searing thunder. The blue force rushes down, raising clouds of gray dust into the air. Someone steps on the ground. His foot is shod in a brown shoe. The girl looks ahead with a smile on her face. She holds a staff with one hand and brings the other to her face. This is Imseen. She is a mage from the Karos Guild. She asks the goater how he likes her blow. He would never survive her searing thunder. Goatmouth lets out a furious roar, raising his hands and clenching his fingers into claws. The girl is surprised that he could do it. The girl clutches her weapon with both hands and steps back in fear as the clawed hand of a monster rushes towards her. A drop of sweat runs down the girl's cheek. Her mouth is slightly open in fear. The monster hits in front of itself. A red light strip appears. Yu Jihan threw the girl out of the path of the blow. One of his hands held her head, and the other rested on the surface. The young man holds Imseen's head and looks away from her, with a nervous and slightly evil grin on his face. The girl looks directly at the face of the guy who is hanging over her. She calls him by name. The monster doesn't have a scratch after being hit directly by the ability. The brunette's eyes light up with a bright blue light, but this blow allowed them to gain time. A girl with short hair looks seriously in front of her. Her eyes glow with a yellow light, and the same aura surrounds her. She crossed her arms with her blades in front of her. The girl ran forward with great speed, leaving a yellow flash behind her. This is Limia. She is the main damage. She is a member of the Karos Guild. The monster staggered away from the attack with a roar, orange rays flashing in front of it. The girl jumped back after the attack, spreading her arms with the weapon to the sides. She used an ability called Quick Strike. The Goatorus leaned his knee on the ground. The monster roared furiously, its yellow eyes flashing. He stands menacingly behind the girl. She holds blades in her hands, with the blades facing back. The monster has swung its clawed paw and is about to hit the girl. She raised her hand with her index finger extended and turned her head slightly to the side. Her gaze is fixed on the finger. A red-haired man jumps on top of the Goator, accompanied by a wave of fire. The monster has already come close to the girl and is standing right behind her, grinning his mouth menacingly. A fiery flash flashed in front of the monster and hit the ground. The Goator staggered back from her. The man used a meteor strike. A large wave of light hit the ground. A red-haired man stands near the monster's body and leans on a huge sword. He says something about the dungeon with a chuckle, but doesn't upload the phrase. The Karos Guild is an undefeated team that ranks first. The red-haired man looks ahead with furrowed brows. He looks stern and serious. This is team leader Kim Henty from the Karos Guild. He says the boss has been killed. The team stands in a circle and rejoices at the successful completion of the battle. Smiles shine on the faces of the magician and the tank. Limia stands with her arms crossed over her chest. Yu Jihan watches them from the side. He told the story and now reveals that he is also one of the founders of the Kim Henty team. Yu Jihan looks ahead with a joyful smile. Sweat runs down his face and neck. He adds that he was or was one of the founders. The monster is on the ground. It has bared its mouth and is reaching for a weapon with its paw. Kim Henty sits on the carcass of a defeated monster, with his head down and his hands on his knees. Standing opposite him is Yu Jihan, his hand clenched into a fist. Kim Henty looks at the young man from under his brows. The man's face is partially hidden in shadow. He wears protective armor, which is hidden by outer clothing. Kim Henty addresses Yu Jihan. The young man looks shocked, his mouth slightly open in surprise, his eyes wide. A bead of sweat runs down Yu Jihan's cheek. Kim Henty informs him that they are removing him from the team. It started to rain outside. Clouds gathered in the dark sky. Yu Jia asks the team leader in shock. A young man walks down the street in the rain. A large bag hangs behind his back, and with one hand he holds onto the strap on his shoulder. The young man holds a phone in his hand. An application is open on the screen, which shows a balance with 10 million. The young man looks ahead blankly. Drops of rain are running down his face. Yu Jihan looks devastated and sad. He says he worked like hell for 7 years and all he got was 10 million won. The young man looks down. There is a small bruise on his face. H. Wang Junho looks ahead with a smile, raising one hand up. One of his eyebrows is raised. The muscles in his neck are tense. He asks Yu Jihan what he did for the team. Im Seon holds her hand near her mouth, a sweet smile on her face. She says that even a beginner can do what Yu Jihan does with a little practice. Limia looks forward without a hint of a smile. She looks serious and calm. The jacket slipped off one of the girl's shoulders. She tells Yu Jihan that he is weak. Kim Henty looks ahead with furrowed brows. His look is serious and stern. He tells the young man that this team no longer needs him. Yu Jihan looks ahead sadly, raindrops running down his cheeks, possibly mixing with tears. His lips are tightly compressed, the corners slightly downward. Yu Jihan stopped and raised his head up. His hands are clenched into fists. He asks himself why he stayed in the Karos Guild. The rain continues to fall. Clouds are gathering over the city, bright lightning is flashing. The story of the hero Yu Jihan comes to an end. Particularly strong and bright lightning erupted over the city. Yu Jihan looks ahead with his mouth open. Half of the young man's face is hidden in shadow. He thinks that he cannot leave it all like this in an instant. Yu Jihan is standing in front of a building with some kind of sign. The young man is surrounded by a green net. There is some kind of verification going on. Yu Jihan's face is illuminated with white light. Looks ahead, his left eye glowing blue. The guy's lips are tightly compressed, he looks gloomy. The young man thinks that his unique ability is accidentally activated in special situations. Behind Yu Jihan is his former team. The young man walks away from them, clenching his hands into fists. After he was expelled from the Keras Guild, he looked for a new guild for a whole week. Yu Jihan sits in front of the monitor, his face illuminated by blue light. The young man looks attentive and focused. The screen in front of him displays some statistical data in the form of scales and circles. Yu Jihan studies them carefully. He eventually found a guild called Fun. The young man looks forward, his mouth slightly open. He looks surprised and has large circles under his eyes. Yu Jihan sits at the computer with his hand on the keyboard. On the screen in front of him, the chances that the guild Fun will turn into a big one if Yu Jihan joins are 99%. The young man looks ahead, one of his eyes glowing blue. Neon blue chains flash in front of him. He sees the possibility. The members of the Keras Guild stand nearby. They all look confident and calm. Yu Jihan thinks that with this ability he will become more successful than the members of Kim Henti's squad. Light enters the room through the windows and slightly illuminates the shelves with folders and some things. There is a package of noodles on the table, and there are blinds on the windows that prevent the light from fully penetrating into the room. Someone lets out a long exhale. A girl with short hair, wearing a green jacket and large headphones, stands with her hands folded in front of her. She says the power went out and she just poured ramen. Yu Jihan opens the door and stands illuminated by the light from outside. The girl holds sticks in her hands and is enthusiastically looking at something. Yu Jihan is all wet, water running down his face. He looks ahead somewhat tiredly and surprised. They ask him who he is. He says the name of the guild, Fun. Yu Jihan looks ahead, his eyes shining an unnatural blue. The guy's mouth opens slightly, his bangs got in the way, getting into his eyes. He says he came here to join the Fun Guild. The girl looks at him with her mouth slightly open. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek. She asks him in surprise about his desire to join the guild. Yu Jihan fell face down on the floor. There is a large bag on his back. The girl is loudly surprised at what just happened. The young man lies unconscious on the floor, his mouth slightly open. Large bruises are visible under the eyes. The girl calls him and asks if the young man is okay. Yu Jihan is reclining on something, bending his knees and leaning on his hands. His mouth is slightly open. The guy looks scared. Yu Jihan found himself on the sofa. He turned his head towards the girl. She stands nearby and looks at the guy. The girl asks Yu Jihan if he is awake. The girl is holding a glass and a bag of something in her hands. She has short blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She says that the young man was passed out for about an hour and calls him by name, asking whether she is right. This is the head of the Fun Guild. Her name is Kim Sihu. The young man closed one eye and looks forward. He put one hand to his head, which clearly hurt. He asks Kim Sihu how she knew his name. The girl holds Yu Jihan's documents in her hands. The name of his previous guild is written there. Kim Sihu looks at the guy. She is completely calm and serious. Asks him about the Keras Guild and why he is trying to join its small guild after being in the big one. Yu Jihan tilts his chin down, his bangs covering his eyes. The guy purses his lips. A drop of sweat runs down his cheek. The young man got up from the sofa and stands near the table, clenching his fists. The girl stands next to her with her hand raised. Yu Jihan says he will explain everything. Kim Sihu folded her hands in front of her, pressing her palms together. She sits opposite Yu Jihan, with a table between them. Kim Sihu says she understands the young man's situation. She placed her elbows on the table and clasped her hands under her chin. The girl watches the young man with a close gaze. Kim Sihu says that with her experience, he can join another guild. She doesn't understand why he chose her. Yu Jihan is somewhat confused and looks at his interlocutor with concern. He starts to say a phrase, but stops. Yu Jihan wonders if Kim Sihu will believe him if he tells her the truth. The young man looked down, one of them glowing blue again. His lips are tightly compressed. Will she believe in this mysterious ability he has? The girl lifts her headphones, about to take them off. Yu Jihan looks at her with a slightly surprised look. She says that she feels that Yu Jihan can't talk about it, then she will talk about herself first. The girl took off her headphones and it turned out that she had pointed tips of her ears. She says that she is the child of an elf and a human, that is, a half-elf. Yu Jihan looks at the girl in shock. Beads of sweat run down his face and neck. He exclaims in surprise that she is a half-elf. Many monsters of different types stand in the middle of the destroyed city. After numerous invasions from different dimensions, many species appeared in the world. A girl with long pointed ears and red eyes is covered in blood. She looks at her arm with a long leg, which is also all stained with red stains of blood. One of the species are elves. Kim Si-hoo holds the headphones in her hands and looks at the young man sitting in front of her. He put his hands on his knees and clenched his fingers. Kim Si-hoo says that she has the blood of elves who once exterminated people and asks Yoo Jae-han what he thinks. She also asks him if he wants to join the fun guild. Yoo Jae-han looks at the girl seriously, his lips pursed. His eyebrows are slightly furrowed. The young man looks serious. Kim Si-hoo looks back at the guy, eyes wide open. She doesn't look away and waits for his answer. Kim Si-hoo put the headphones on the table and clasped her hands, placing them on her knees. Yoo Jae-han tells her that she is trying to scare him, but her hands are shaking very badly. The girl reacts to this with silent surprise. She clenches her hands tightly and looks at the young man. The girl's mouth is slightly open and she is in some confusion. Yoo Jae-han says that he has nothing against elves. He saw them a couple of times and they were not too different from people. Yoo Jae-han smiles widely, narrowing his eyes. He looks good-natured and sweet. He tells the girl that only very bad people will discriminate against elves because they belong to a different species. Kim Si-hoo put her hand to her lips. Her cheeks turned pink from embarrassment. The girl folded her arms on her legs, placing one palm on top of the other. She doesn't look nervous anymore. Kim Si-hoo says that she understands the young man. She will review his application and contact him. Yoo Jae-han thanks her. The staff lying on the table begins to glow green. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han look at him in surprise. The guy even opened his mouth slightly. The girl is surprised that Pluron reacted. The stone in the staff begins to glow brighter. A small ball has separated from it, emitting a green light. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo watch this with slight surprise and bewilderment. The girl asks a question, as if suggesting that this is the spirit of the sylph. The ball flew up to the young man and stopped near his head. Yoo Jae-han is a little scared, and a bead of sweat runs down his cheek. Kim Si-hoo thinks that the spirit has been dormant for 12 years and wonders why Yoo Jae-han activated it. The green ball began to glow even brighter, literally blinding. The young man looks at him in fascination. Yoo Jae-han wonders out loud what is happening. Kim Si-hoo jumps up and extends his hand forward, as if trying to stop what is happening. The blue glow near the guy became even brighter and covered a larger area. Someone mentally screams denial. A bright blue light column shoots up from the building. It shoots straight into the sky, illuminating the clouds. It is so huge that it can be seen from different parts of the city. Blue particles of light fly in the air. Kim Si-hoo sits on the floor with her legs crossed. The girl looks in shock at the blue light that is right next to her. Sweat runs down the girl's face. Her mouth is slightly open in surprise. Yoo Jae-han stands surrounded by blue light and holds an orb in his hand. The young man looks at the sphere in his hands with great surprise. The girl thinks that this cannot be. The sylph entered into a contract with the man. Yoo Jae-han looks at the open palm on which the sylph spirit is located. Blue light is reflected in the young man's eyes. Eliminated hero Yoo Jae-han has just received a very rare class that only 20 people in the world have. Many people stand behind the young man. They all look completely different. Some are human, some have pointed ears. From now on, Yoo Jae-han is an elementalist. A large number of people are standing next to each other. Among them are men and young girls. There are people who sign contracts with special beings and use their powers. A man in a purple cloak stands with a book in his hands. Behind him are pentagrams with various runes. Small spheres representing the elements fly above a person's head. This person is a representative of the very rare class of elementalists. A man with long black hair and a short beard looks confidently ahead. This is Mist Elementalist Luca Harrison. A bare-chested man stands submerged in water. A bun of hair is tied on his head. This man is a sea elementalist. His name is Maloshi Soipua. An elderly man with a long beard, dressed in oriental clothes, stands with his arm outstretched. He is a sand elementalist. His name is Abu Bakar. The elementalists of this world are unusual beings. Many people are standing surrounded by green fog. Their eyes are hidden in the shadows. Each of them has a power comparable to the power of an entire guild. Yoo Jae-han holds the sylph spirit in his hand. Sitting next to him on the floor is Kim Si-hoo. And now another unusual elementalist has been born. Yoo Jae-han takes a step forward while still looking at the ball in his hands. The young man is engulfed in a blue glow. Yoo Jae-han clenched his hand with the ball into a fist. He looks at him, and behind the young man there are more people. Yoo Jae-han is now a windy elementalist. It continues to rain outside. There is a lopsided sign near the building. It says that the Heroic Guild vessel is located here. Someone starts a dialogue. Kim Si-hoo sits on the sofa with her legs crossed. She is holding a glass of something in her hands. Yoo Jae-han goes to the girl. He asks her if he made a contract with the spirit. Kim Si-hoo answers the young man with agreement. A beautiful elf girl stands under the full moon. She is overcome by the power of the green hue. Kim Si-hoo looks ahead with her mouth open. She doesn't look scared or nervous. She says that the contract was concluded with the wind spirit Silpha. This is her late mother. Yoo Jae-han stands opposite the girl with his hands raised in front of him. He looks shocked and scared. He says he has to return it. Maybe they can break the contract. Kim Si-hoo tells him that it is too late. Yoo Jae-han looks at the girl, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. A blue light flashed behind the young man. Kim Si-hoo says that once a spirit has chosen its owner, it is not so easy to change it. Yoo Jae-han pursed his lips, his eyebrows slightly raised. The young man clearly did not want to become an elementalist. Kim Si-hoo says that the contract will only be broken when the owner leaves for another world. The girl squeezes a glass in her hand and looks at the young man. She placed her other hand on her knee. Yoo Jae-han asks what he should do now. The girl asks him a question. Kim Si-hoo rose to her feet and waved her hands in the air. Opposite her stands a surprised Yoo Jae-han. Kim Si-hoo tells him that he passed the test and asks if the guy wants to run away. The young man refuses her. He looks firmly and confidently at his interlocutor. The bangs hang haphazardly over his forehead. The guy's mouth is slightly open. He says that he only wants to join the fun guild. He is not interested in any other. The girl stands opposite him, pursing her lips and trying to hold back her emotions. However, deep down she is very happy. Kim Si-hoo says it's a smart choice. She walked a little closer to the guy and extended her hand in front of her. There is a wide, joyful smile on the girl's face. Her eyes are narrowed. She says that from now on she will teach Yoo Jae-han how to use the spirit. Kim Si-hoo looks ahead with wide eyes. She is very surprised, her mouth slightly open. A greenish glow appeared on her side. Yoo Jae-han denies and suggests trying it right now. A young man holds a blue ball in his palm. He looks at him enthusiastically and interestedly. He says he'll try it in monster territory. The buildings are surrounded by a protective blue circle that stretches high into the sky. Monster territory is a designation for a special area where monsters appear. Monsters of various types are surrounded by pink and purple glows. All of them look very dangerous. In monster territory, monsters from the 1st to the 5th class appear. The closer to the 1st class, the more powerful the appearing monsters become. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han are walking along a city street. The girl is holding a staff in her hands, and the young man is holding a long sword. They approach the monster's territory, surrounded by a blue shield. Yoo Jae-han looks calm, looking straight ahead. There is a sword in the young man's hand. Butchin is the territory of 5th class monsters. This is a great place to try everything out. Yoo Jae-han turns his head towards the girl. Kim Si-hoo looks around, holding his staff tightly in his hands. Yoo Jae-han turns to her and looks at the girl. She clutches the staff to her chest. Kim Si-hoo looks nervous. The young man asks her what's wrong. Kim Si-hoo looked embarrassed and looked down, holding the staff to her shoulder. She says that this is her first time in monster territory after studying at the Hero Academy. Yoo Jae-han makes a surprised sound. The young man looks at the embarrassed girl who has closed her eyes. She lowered the staff down and spread her arms slightly to the sides. Yoo Jae-han asks her why she didn't tell earlier. Kim Si-hoo replies that she was shy because she is the head of the guild. Yoo Jae-han says that in this case, he will take on the role of leader. The young man crosses the protective barrier, which easily lets him into the territory. He and the girl stepped into the territory of monsters. Yoo Jae-han is not nervous and calmly walks forward. Kim Si-hoo is slightly behind the young man and stays behind him. A huge mountain of rubble from the city opens up before them. Kim Si-hoo holds the phone in her hands and looks at the screen. Yoo Jae-han turned his head slightly in her direction, a slight smile on his face. He asks the girl if she can tell what type of monsters appear here. Kim Si-hoo agrees and asks him to give her a minute. A strange creature with a huge beak, blue body and red plumage stands on green grass. Monsters that may be in Butchin are basilisks. Yoo Jae-han asks the girl the name of the monster. Many yellow chicks are located near an overturned rusty car. According to the news, about 2 weeks ago there was an accident in which a truck carrying chickens overturned. The young man grabbed the scabbard with the sword and reached for its hilt. Yoo Jae-han takes out his sword, and you can tell from his face that the guy is looking forward to the upcoming battle. He repeats about chickens and says they are perfect for training. The city road is littered with debris. Many buildings have collapsed and tilted. From now on, this is the battlefield, a place where blood can be shed and flesh can be torn at any moment. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo head forward, deeper into the ruins. The young man looks calm and confident, but the girl is a little worried. Their team currently consists of 2 people. Yoo Jae-han thinks that he needs to take on the role of a tank and someone who will deal damage. Kim Si-hoo is clearly worried, her lips pressed tightly together and her gaze directed forward. Yoo Jae-han moves forward along the road. The girl stopped behind him, with her feet shoulder-width apart and her staff in front of her. She says she feels like there's something in the parking lot. A blue basilisk head appears near the white car, holding a human corpse in its beak. The basilisk stands with its wings spread and holds its body by its head. The animal makes a furious roar. The basilisk is a 5th class monster. Yu Jihan puts his sword in front of him. He looks at the basilisk very intently. Behind him stands Kim Sihu, who is holding a staff. Fear is written on the girl's face. Yu Jihan turns his head towards the girl and glances at her. He calls her name and asks her to stand behind and support him. The basilisk steps with its clawed paw on the ground, and a blue flash bursts out from under it. The monster swings its clawed paw and opens its beak wide. He growls furiously, preparing to attack. Someone from the team shouts that he is coming. The basilisk attacks Yu Jihan, intending to grab him with its clawed paws. A young man blocks a blow with a sword. A blue flash of power appears at the point of impact. A light and very pleased smile shines on the young man's face. Yu Jihan turns his head back and looks at the girl. He continues to hold the sword in front of him. Yu Jihan calls Kim Sihu by name. The girl stands surrounded by a blue glow. A blue ball glows in front of her. The girl looks carefully in front of her. A blue glow is reflected in her eyes. Using his staff, Kim Sihu directs a blue beam forward. The girl's mouth is slightly open. She uses an ability called Wind Arrow. The blue light slams into the basilisk, knocking Yu Jihan aside. The monster lets out a furious scream. The blue force crashes into the surface and a bright flash appears. The basilisk lies on the asphalt, spreading its wings to the sides. A crater from the impact formed under him. Yu Jihan stands next to the basilisk, legs spread wide and holding a sword in his hands. The young man turns to Kim Sihu and smiles widely. The girl stands with a staff in her hand and looks at the young man. Yu Jihan says it was great. Kim Sihu replies that when she graduated from Hero Academy, she was at the top of her class. The girl stands with one hand resting on her side, and the other holds a staff. The young man continues to stand near the basilisk's corpse. Something blue flashes behind him. Kim Sihu notices something and looks ahead in alarm, her mouth parted. Yu Jihan stands half sideways and looks ahead anxiously. Several basilisks jump at him from behind, intending to tear the guy to pieces. Kim Sihu loudly shouts the guy's name and warns that there is something behind him. Yu Jihan turns back and looks at the monsters. The young man's eye lights up blue. The guy's lips are compressed, and there is not a drop of fear in his gaze. The guy's eye began to glow even brighter, and a ring of white light appeared around the pupil. The skill is activated. The young man is facing the basilisks. A green net has appeared in front of him. Triangles with red exclamation marks glow above the heads of the basilisks. The young man looks ahead with an attentive gaze. A blue glow emanates from his left eye. Something is being tested. The young man opened his mouth slightly, revealing his teeth. He says, "We need to find an escape route." Yu Jihan crouches down, placing his hand on the ground and dodging the blow of the basilisks, who collide heads in the air. If you bend down, the chance of evasion is 82%. Yu Jihan looks down. A green glow envelops him. White flashes fly in the air. A blue ball appeared above the young man's hand. Yu Jihan uses acceleration. The young man swings his weapon in the air with great speed, striking his opponents. His actions cause blue flashes to appear in the air. Yu Jihan looks down, his lips pressed tightly together. A young man stands with his legs wide apart. Behind him lie the severed bodies of defeated basilisks. Kim Sihu looks forward with surprise and admiration. A small drop of sweat runs down the girl's cheek. She says it's incredible that Yu Jihan was able to find a common language with Sylph so quickly. The girl asks herself if he really woke up just a day ago. Yu Jihan continues to stand in the same place. His twist develops in the wind. One hand is clenched into a fist. The sword is clutched in the other. Someone asks what type of monster this is. Yu Jihan put the sword back into its sheath. The young man bent down and picked up the head of the dead basilisk by the mane. Kim Sihu runs up to him, holding the staff in both hands. Yu Jihan invites Kim Sihu to extract resources. The girl agrees with him. Yu Jihan wonders if this is enough. The young man leaned forward slightly, hunching his back. He looks thoughtful and focused. The guy's left eye lights up blue again. Everything around him seems to be plunged into darkness. With a sharp movement, he turns his head to the side and opens his mouth wide in a scream. The young man's eyebrows are furrowed. His gaze is alarmed and tense. He shouts Kim Sihu's name, telling her to be careful. A huge monster appears behind the running girl, several times larger than Kim Sihu. The girl asks the young man. A huge mutated bird, resembling a long snake, rushes forward, surrounded by a red light. The bird grabs stones lying on the ground with its paw. The girl is standing next to Yu Jihan. Their legs are very close. The young people are surrounded by a blue glow. Yu Jihan hugs the girl with one arm, shielding her from the monster. Behind him is a bird that looks ahead with its bright orange eyes. Yu Jihan asks Kim Sihu if she is okay. The girl hesitantly answers with consent. The young man let go of the girl and turned towards the bird. There is a serious and concentrated expression on his face. He took the sword out of its sheath again and held it out in front of him. An excited and frightened girl stands behind him. Kim Sihu exclaims why such a monster appeared in this level 5 territory. Yu Jihan says that he thinks something is happening. A bird of enormous size is on the ground. Its beak is wide open. Its head is raised high. Yu Jihan says that this is another variety. In front of them is a monster of an unknown class, which is a type of basilisk. The young man's eye begins to glow blue again. Yu Jihan looks straight ahead, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. He looks at a huge basilisk, above which 3 triangles with exclamation marks simultaneously lit up. Yu Jihan calculates the probability of defeating this monster and it is 12%. A young man stands in front of a girl, covering her with his shoulder. He held his sword out in front of him, preparing to take a blow or stand sideways. Yu Jihan asks Kim Sihu if she can slow down the basilisk. She asks him again in surprise. Yu Jihan begins to run forward at high speed, putting his hand without a sword in front of him. The shocked Kim Sihu remained behind him, clutching her staff with both hands. She says she can only slow the monster down for a moment. Yu Jihan says that will be enough. The animal rose to its paws, a red light bursting out from under them. The monster has its beak wide open and leans forward, about to attack. The young man runs towards the basilisk, his hand with the sword behind his back. The basilisk raised its head up and spread its wings wide. Yu Jihan turns his head to the side and opens his mouth wide in a scream. Due to its high speed, its eyes leave behind a blue light. He orders Kim Sihu to act now. The girl puts the staff in front of her. The stone on its top begins to glow pink. The girl uses an ability called Slowing Wind. A pink glow of magic engulfs the bird. Yu Jihan flies towards her, about to attack the basilisk. The bird is all entangled in pink ribbons of power. A young man flies up to her, shrouded in a blue glow. The bird's beak is tightly bound by the girl's strength. Yu Jihan swings his sword to hit the bird. The basilisk looks at the young man with its bright orange eyes. The bonds on his beak begin to fall apart. The basilisk opened its mouth wide. The pink bonds fell off. Yu Jihan rushes straight into the open mouth of the monster. The basilisk has its beak wide open and waits for the young man to approach it. Yu Jihan continues to stubbornly fly towards the monster, feet first. The young man does not look afraid. His lips are tightly compressed. He remembers Kim Henti and his face the last time they met, when the guy was kicked out of the guild. Remembers how Kim Henti said that Yu Jihan was useless. A red, ragged flash appears in the air. The basilisk is shrouded in a red net, with green fog approaching it from all sides. A bright flash heads towards the monster's beak. Yu Jihan used an ability called Gust of Wind. The young man is engulfed in a blue glow. In front of him is a lot of fragments and scraps of the bird. Feathers fly in the air and smoothly fall down. Yu Jihan looks calmly in front of him. He is focused on the fight. There is a blue glow around it with small white flashes. White clouds float in the blue sky. Yu Jihan lands down, debris flying next to him. Someone is standing on the roof of a skyscraper, wearing light gray shoes with black accents. The man holds his hand in front of his face. He smiles slightly. The expression in his eyes is invisible behind his glasses. The man exhales. He is wearing a snake print shirt and light-colored shorts. With a smile on his face, he asks if there is really another elementalist in Korea besides him. This man is an earth elementalist. His name is Yoon Do-ha. The city road is completely covered with rubble of buildings and broken, rusty cars and buses. In many places dust rises into the air. This is Hwasong, Gyeonggi Province, the territory of second-level monsters. Dust rises above the debris, and large clouds of black smoke can be seen somewhere in the distance. Something collapses and debris flies down, clouds of dust flying around. A monster that looks like a huge snake or worm is crawling around the city. In its mouth there is a huge number of fangs, which are arranged in several rows. Near one of the teeth there are 2 red eyes. This creature moves and breaks buildings around it, causing debris to fall down. Several of these huge, red monsters are in monster territory, all of them heading menacingly in someone's direction. Their mouths are wide open. One of them grabs something with its mouth, causing a cloud of dust to rise in its mouth. The man with dark hair furrowed his eyebrows and opened his mouth wide. He clenched his hands, which were wearing some strange gloves. In front of the man, from where his hands joined, a blue flash appeared that illuminated his face. He activated a skill called Aggression. Hwang Junho stands next to the monster and holds it by its huge fang. The man and the red serpent are engulfed in blue light. The monster moves with tremendous force towards the ground and crashes into it, raising clouds of dust. Hwang Junho clenched his teeth with effort, trying to hold back the monster's attack. A huge red snake attacks the man's shield, trying to break through the defense. The man makes a strangled sound. The man turns his head slightly to the side and glances behind him. He is completely engulfed in a blue glow that comes from the place where the serpent and the shield collide. He urges him seen, says that he won't be able to hold him back for too long. A huge snake attacks a man who has his legs spread wide for greater stability. Behind him stands a girl in high boots. She answers the man and says that she knows. Her eyes begin to glow yellow, and small lightning flashes in front of her face. She used an ability called Chain Lightning. A yellow light envelops all the snakes. They begin to squirm furiously. The girl stands with her legs spread wide and looks forward at a flash of bright yellow light. In front of the girl are huge clouds of gray-yellow dust. Bright lightning flashes in this space. Imseen holds a staff in his hand and looks up. A wide smile shines on her face. Her hair flutters slightly in the wind. She says with a chuckle that they made such a fuss about these kids. The team's tank emerges from the clouds of dust. He raised his arms above his head and looks outraged. The girl looks at him, raising one hand at shoulder level. Tank says he almost got hit. The magician tells him that this is why she told him to lose weight. The man looks ahead, frowning and parting his mouth. Clouds of dust rise behind him. He says that in any case we need to prepare for a retreat. The girl stands with her hand with her staff down. A huge snake appeared behind her, opened its mouth and was about to eat the girl. She screams that there is danger behind her. The girl turns her head back and glances with blue eyes at the snake. The girl's teeth are tightly clenched in a grin. She is surprised that one of them survived. The girl begins to say Yu Jihan's name and asks him to cover for her, but breaks off the phrase. Suddenly the girl's eyes open wide. The snake rushes straight at her. The girl simply stands and looks towards the approaching danger. She remembers that Yu Jihan is no longer on their team. A fiery flash appears in front of the monster's face. The girl stands in front of her, clenching her hand into a fist. She is silently surprised that she was covered. Kim Henti cut the monster in half. The man stands opposite the frightened girl. Kim Henti's cloak flutters in the wind, and flashes of fire are in the air. A man stands leaning on his sword. His lips are tightly compressed, and his eyebrows are furrowed and drawn to the bridge of his nose. The girl exclaims the name of her team leader. Many defeated monsters lie on the ground, their carcasses piled on top of each other. There are still clouds of dust hovering around them, which will not clear away. The mage and the tank are leaning on the wall of the building. Collapsed houses can be seen behind them. The girl and the man are sweating and looking tired. MC exhales and says it's too hard. The tank sits with its back pressed against the wall, its head slightly lowered down. The mouth is wide open as the man breathes noisily. He says that this monster is different from the usual one. The man wonders if it could be some kind of variety. The girl looks at the man from top to bottom. She's drenched in sweat. Tells the man that there was nothing strange about the monsters. Kim Henti appeared in front of them and looks at the man and girl. Imseen looks at the team leader a little worried. Kim Henti says that it was an ordinary giant worm. The man clenches his hand into a fist, wearing a glove with protective metal armor. The man raises his fist and his back, as if he is about to hit someone. The eyebrows on his face, as usual, are drawn down to the bridge of his nose. He asks why they were so afraid of this monster. Tank jumped to his feet and stood in front of Kim Henti. The girl and man raised their hands in front of them, as if trying to protect themselves from their leader. There is clear fear on their faces. Someone else has come to this platform and is going to say something about it. The magician and the tank glance sideways at the man who came. Their facial expressions do not change. They are still scared and sweating profusely. Limea, covered in dirt and blood, approaches the company. Curved blades are clutched in her hands. Someone exclaims the girl's name. Limea's eyes glow with a bright red light. Now it is more clearly visible that her hair and face are also covered in dirt and blood. She reports that processing of the second zone is completed. Kim Henti turns his head towards the girl and glances at her. One of the man's arms is raised in the air at shoulder level. He turns to Limea and says reproachfully that he told her not to behave as she pleases. The man furrowed his brows even more, and the veins on his face bulged. He looks angry and seems to be in a quiet rage. He tells the girl that there is no one else to take care of her. The girl glances sideways in his direction. Her face does not express any emotion. She tells the man that she knows about it. Tank looks down, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. The man's eyebrows are furrowed in puzzlement. The girl behind him looks at him in surprise. The man says Yu Jihan's name and asks if they are in this situation because of this guy. Kim Henti suddenly waves his hand, causing his cloak to fly into the air. All the team members stared at him. The man opened his mouth wide and said that this is impossible. Kim Henti's hand is clenched into a fist. His eyebrows are furrowed with displeasure, and the veins are bulging on his face. He says that even if he left, he was just Yu Jihan. They don't need someone like him anymore. Yu Jihan is standing on the road, engulfed in a blue light. Behind his back lie even cubes of meat. Kim Si-Hu walked a little closer to the young man. Her hand is raised up to her face. Yu Jihan stands with his back to the girl. His eye continues to glow blue. Kim Si-Hu looked at the young man in shock, clenching his hand next to him. Her eyes are wide open, a bead of sweat running down her cheek. She thinks in amazement that Yu Jihan single-handedly felled this giant. Yu Jihan looks ahead with pursed lips. Behind him, the blue glow of his elemental floats in the air. The girl wonders who Yu Jihan is. Someone steps on the curb. The person's foot is wearing a red sneaker with white and black accents. A young man in glasses and a gray t-shirt stands in front of cubes of meat. Behind his back is a large black backpack. The guy is surprised and wonders if those two themselves killed that type of monster. A wide and slightly sinister smile shines on the young man's face. He clutches the strap of his backpack tightly. He joyfully exclaims that there is a gold mine in front of him. Yu Jaehan stands next to the defeated monster. It is still engulfed in blue light. Kim Si-hoo approaches him, waving his arms in the air. She screams his name loudly and asks if he is hurt. The young man stopped glowing and fell to the ground. Kim Si-hoo approaches him with a worried expression. She knelt down next to Yu Jaehan and lifted him up, putting her arm around his shoulders. The girl looks at the young man with anxiety and excitement. She asks him if he is okay. Yu Jaehan raised his hand and turned towards the girl. She looks at him with tears in her eyes. Yu Jaehan addresses the girl by her first name. There is a wide, tired but happy smile on the young man's face. Large bruises appeared under his eyes. He points his finger towards the girl and invites her to extract resources. There is a wide, joyful smile on the young man's face. He is covered in dust and has large patches of dirt on his cheeks. Yu Jaehan says that the monster varieties are very rare. They will definitely be able to sell them at a high price. The girl's face is hidden in the shadows. She looks down at the guy. There is a somewhat stunned expression on her face. The girl punches a young man in the stomach. He exhales in surprise, his eyes widening. Kim Si-hoo indignantly says that he is also joking. She was so worried, she thought that something had happened to him. The young man makes a strangled sound through his teeth. Kim Si-hoo's eyes and mouth widen. She looks surprised. The girl says that this is too much and asks the guy if he agrees with her. Yu Jaehan sits on the ground with his legs clenched at the knees, one of his hands pressed to his stomach. The girl sits next to him on her knees. She holds the young man's back. They look at the cubes of monster meat together. Yu Jaehan is somewhat puzzled by what he sees, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. He says it will be difficult for the two of them. Yu Jaehan and Kim Si-hoo turn back. Behind them stands a young man in red sneakers. He says it looks like they need help. Yu Jaehan and Kim Si-hoo express a silent question. The brown-haired man is dressed in green clothes and a white t-shirt. He took off his large transparent glasses. A wide, satisfied smile shines on his face. He greets Yu Jaehan and Kim Si-hoo, calling them heroes. The young man smiles widely and narrows his eyes. He looks nice and friendly, says his name is Chan Same. He's from the Montana Monster Processing Company. The young man is the general director of this company. Kim Si-hoo and Yu Jaehan rose to their feet. They stood on the floor turning to the guy. The girl has a slightly puzzled expression on her face. Yu Jaehan looks calm and collected. Kim Si-hoo asks in surprise about the Monster Processing Company. Yu Jaehan tells her that these are people who specialize in collecting waste from monsters. Yu Jaehan looks at Jang Same with suspicion, as if he suspects something. Yu Jaehan asks what the businessman is doing in monster territory. Chan Same stands opposite the guy and the girl, with his hand in his pocket and the other raised behind his head. He says their company is brand new, so he has to do things like this to earn a living. Kim Si-hoo and Yu Jaehan turn towards their prey. There is a serious expression on their faces. Weapons are clutched in their hands. Chan Same asks how about leaving the processing of the basilisk carcasses to their company. Kim Si-hoo looks at Yu Jaehan with a smile. She was clearly delighted with Jang Same's proposal. Yu Jaehan doesn't seem so excited. Kim Si-hoo happily tells Yu Jaehan to leave it to him. Yu Jaehan has some suspicions and thinks that something is wrong. Chan Same took off his backpack and stands leaning on it, with his other hand on his belt. Chan Same holds onto the sleeve of his jacket, his hands wearing gloves that do not cover his fingers. He says he will check the bodies first. Chan Same put on his goggles and walked over to the meat cubes. Yu Jaehan and Kim Si-hoo stand behind him and watch the actions of the young man. Chan Same is surprised and says they cut them well. Meat of this quality will certainly be expensive. Chan Same sits with a slight smile on his face. Yu Jaehan stands with his arms crossed and looks at the girl. Kim Si-hoo cupped her hands near her face and tilted her head, a wide smile on her face. She is happy and suggests starting with moving to a new office. Chan Same smiles sinisterly, his eyes hidden by glasses. He thinks about leaving her as much waste as she wants. His hand reaches for the purple crystal that is inside the piece of meat. The young man no longer seems sweet and good-natured. His smile looks sinister. He looks at the crystal in his hand. Chan Same thinks that in return he will take something worthwhile for himself. A bright purple crystal hangs in the air. A slight glow emanates from it. A magical crystal that appears only after the death of a species. Chan Same thinks he can get rich from this. Chan Same stands in the middle of the rubble. The young man spread his legs wide and spread his arms. He wonders out loud what is happening. Chan Same stands on the rocks. They have partially swallowed up his hands. Yu Jaehan and Kim Si-hoo stand nearby and look at what is happening in surprise. They protect themselves from stones and dust with their hands. Some people are surprised by what is happening here. Chan Same seems to be crucified with these stones. They hold him by his arms and legs. The guy's head is slightly turned. He is looking behind himself. Chan Same asks to spare him. He will give back their magic crystal. Sweat runs down Chan Sain's face, his eyes and mouth wide open in horror. Some say that all these businessmen have bad habits. Yoo Jae-han stands with his hand out in front of him and looks forward. Kim Se-hoo with great surprise and fear. Chan Sain is asked how he dares to steal someone else's item. The earth elemental approaches Yoo Jae-han and Kim Se-hoo, his hands in his pockets, his head slightly tilted forward. The man in the snake print shirt smiles widely and straightens his hair with one hand. He asks Yoo Jae-han and Kim Se-hoo if this is their magic crystal. This person is Yoon Do-ha's first-class hero. Kim Se-hoo heads towards the man, clutching the edge of his jacket in his hand. Yoo Jae-han looks at the man warily, holding the sword in front of him. Kim Se-hoo asks what Yoon Do-ha from the Dice Guild is doing in a place like this. Yoo Jae-han holds a purple magic crystal in his hand. It glows slightly and small particles break off from it. Yoo Jae-han slightly raised his hand with the crystal, but the young man did not look at him. His gaze was directed at the man. She tells him that this item belongs to their guild, which is called Fun. He asks Yoon Do-ha if he is going to rob them. The man narrows his eyes slightly and frowns. His gaze becomes cunning. There is a wide smile on the man's face. He says that by order of the association he had to catch this species. Yoo Jae-han sweats profusely, his eye glowing blue again. There is a slightly nervous smile on the young man's face. He tells the man that it is his problem. A fight with this person is very dangerous. Yoon Do-ha stands with one hand behind his back and the other in his pocket. He looks relaxed and a little stern. Yoo Jae-han calculated the probability of victory and it is 0%. Yoon Do-ha says that he feels like Yoo Jae-han didn't understand something. The young man looks at the place where the earth elemental had just stood, but there were only small clouds of dust left there. Yoo Jae-han expresses a silent question. He is surprised by what just happened. Yoon Do-ha finds himself behind the young man. With one hand he is already holding him, and with the other he is swinging to strike. Yoon Do-ha says it's not a request. The man's palm fell on the young man's face. Yoo Jae-han looks shocked by this unexpected blow. He asks himself when he had time. Yoon Do-ha slams the young man into the ground with great force. Yoo Jae-han falls face forward, and the impact sends debris flying in all directions. Yoon Do-ha holds the guy by the head while continuing to clench his fist. The man smiles widely looking at his victim. He says it was more of a warning. Yoo Jae-han looks behind him with his blue eye. The man's hand continues to hold his head. He calls Yoo Jae-han a dear young elementalist. The man presses Yoo Jae-han's head into the ground while squatting next to him. The young man lies face down, his arms outstretched to the sides. Under the young man, the ground cracked due to the impact and an impressive dent formed. There is dust in the air, which resembles a light fog. Chan Sain looks behind him, beads of sweat running down his face. His teeth are clenched tightly. There is a nervous grin on his face. His eyebrows are furrowed and drawn to the bridge of his nose. The young man looks annoyed and dissatisfied. He mentally exclaims why he ran into this guy here. Yoon Do-ha stands surrounded by a large number of people. A flag with a dice flutters above him. Behind these people, the city is burning. Most of the buildings are engulfed in flames. The sky was clouded with black smoke from the fire. Yoon Do-ha is the leader of one of the most powerful guilds in Korea, called Dice. The man put his hands in the pockets of his light-colored shorts. His eyes are not visible behind the glasses. His lips are tightly compressed. Small stones are served behind him. Yoon Do-ha is the only earth elementalist in the entire world. He is a transcendental hero. Yoon Do-ha smiles widely, showing white, even teeth. His eyebrows are furrowed and he looks ahead confidently. It is clear from this person that she knows her strength and does not doubt herself. Behind him there are burning buildings. The light from the fire illuminates the man's figure. This man is called Earth Dragon Yoon Do-ha. Kim Se-hoo held her staff out in front of her, her other hand raised and pointing forward. Her mouth is wide open in a scream and her legs are shoulder-width apart. The girl asks Yoon Do-ha to move away from Yoo Jae-han. Her staff glows blue. The girl looks nervous and anxious, beads of sweat running down her face. They tell her that it will be better if she stays where she is now. The man still doesn't take his hands off the guy's head. Yoo Do-ha's face is hidden in shadow, but a wide and sinister smile is visible. He says that otherwise Yoo Jae-han will die. Kim Se-hoo lowers his staff and angrily bares his teeth in impotence. She looks at the man and the young man and cannot help. The girl makes a strangled sound out loud and thinks that this man is serious. Yoo Jae-han squeezes the fingers of the hand lying on the ground. Yoon Do-ha looks down with some surprise from where the green-blue glow is coming from. Yoo Jae-han asks about his death. The young man looks at the man who is holding his head. The veins in his arms bulged. His eye glowed blue again, like the rest of the young man. He tells Yoon Do-ha that he is the one who will die. The young man uses a skill called Windy Night. Yoon Do-ha flies into the air with her legs spread wide and her arms folded across her chest. A green-blue flash threw him high into the air and pushed him back. The man covers his face with his hands, on which the veins are swollen. Yoon Do-ha is engulfed in the green light emanating from Yoo Jae-han. He is surprised at what just happened. Yoon Do-ha erects a stone wall behind him, which stops his flight and helps him stay on his feet. The man is engulfed in a yellow glow that stretches along the entire trajectory of his fall. He exclaims that Yoo Jae-han was definitely slammed into the ground. The man is slightly hunched over and leans his hand on blocks of stone. Despite the fact that he was thrown so far away, the man doesn't seem to have a single scratch on him. Even the glasses on his face did not move a millimeter. Yoon Do-ha's eyebrows are furrowed and his lip is bitten. He looks ahead of him from under his brows. Yoon Do-ha looks puzzled and thoughtful, clearly contemplating what just happened. Yoon Do-ha doesn't say a single word, but mentally wonders. Yoo Jae-han rose to his feet, but it was difficult for him to stand and he leaned on his bent knee. Drops of sweat run down the young man's face. In the pit in which Yoo Jae-han was located there lies a blue ball. This is his element. Yoon Do-ha calls to look at the guy. The moment he fell to the ground, the young man summoned the elements to reduce the damage. The young man flies face forward, his eyes glowing blue, and power flows around him. The man's hand holds Yoo Jae-han's head, pushing the guy down. Yoon Do-ha adjusts his glasses with 2 fingers, his eyebrows furrowed and drawn together. The man's lips are tightly compressed, and the corners are displeasedly lowered down. In addition, hiding the elements, he managed to counterattack. Yoo Jae-han breathes heavily, looking ahead wearily, sweat running down his face. Yoon Do-ha says that he is a very interesting guy. Yoo Jae-han again calculates the probability. A green grid appeared around him again. With one hand he rests on his chin, supporting his head. The young man frowns thoughtfully, looking ahead. His eye glows with a bright blue light. A red window labeled danger warns that continued use of elemental magic will result in a 95% chance of death. Yoo Jae-han looks ahead, sweat running down his face. He thinks about how he spent all his remaining mana on this attack, but it still didn't do any damage. A man, enveloped in a yellow glow, holds his hand near his face near the bridge of his nose, as if he wants to adjust his glasses again. Yoon Do-ha takes a step forward, about to step away from the wall that was created. So this is what a first-class hero is like. Yoo Jae-han is not his opponent. The man stepped on the ground with his foot, which was all shining with a yellow light. He says that now something will happen, calls Yoo Jae-han an expensive newcomer. The man confidently walks towards the young man, a yellow aura shining around him. The man's hands are clenched into fists and tensely stretched along his body. His shoulders are slightly hunched and his head is tilted forward. His whole appearance suggests that he is ready for battle. Yoon Do-ha says that since they exchanged greeting blows, maybe they can move on to the second round. The man clutches a purple magic crystal in his hand and looks at it with a serious look. The veins on his face and neck tensed, the corner of his lips turned down slightly. He asks who will be first. Yoo Jae-han raises his hands up, palms facing the opponent. There is a tired expression on his face. His mouth is slightly open. The guy looks exhausted. There is dirt or small abrasions on his cheeks. A yellow background with various symbols appeared around him. The young man says he gives up. The man stands opposite him, legs spread wide and his hand with the crystal moved to the side and slightly behind his back. Behind it is a stone wall that saved Yoon Do-ha from falling. Opposite him stands Yoo Jae-han with his hands raised, the hem of his jacket fluttering slightly. Yoon Do-ha is surprised at how young a person can give up. He tells him that the man's goal is a magic crystal and asks if he is right. Then he says that he no longer wants to continue the battle. The man looks at the guy, clenching his teeth and grinning widely in bewilderment. His brows are furrowed and the veins on his forehead are bulging. Large but sparse drops of sweat flow down the man's face and neck. In front of him he clutches a purple magic crystal. Yoo Jae-han asks him if Yoon Do-ha is really going to violate the Declaration of Surrender, the 9th paragraph of the 38th article of the Law on Heroes. Yoon Do-ha replies that he was just trying to have fun. He glances to the side. A stream of air flies next to him. 2 helicopters appear above the man's head. Yoon Do-ha holds the crystal in his hand. Lifting it up, the other hand is in his pocket. The man is leaning against the wall behind him. He says these guys arrived on time. They are members of the association. Yoo Joo-han and Kim Si-hoo stand on the road, trying to stay on their feet from the wind blowing them away. The girl put her staff forward, and the young man put his hand forward, so they are trying to protect themselves from dust and air currents. Kim Si-hoo exclaims in surprise, "Is this really the Hero Association helicopter?" A girl dressed in a skirt and jacket stands on the edge of the helicopter and looks down. Glasses are on her face. With one hand she holds onto the top of the door. Her legs are bent at the knees, and with the other hand she holds onto her ear. The girl is clearly scared to stand near the open door, but she stubbornly does it. She screams indignantly at Yoon Do-ha, asking him how he could go alone. He turns towards the girl. Yoon Do-ha holds the crystal in front of him at arm's length. His feet are shoulder-width apart. His other hand is slightly clenched at the elbow. The man tells the girl that he has completed his task, so there is no need to reprimand him immediately after arriving. The helicopter lands on the ground. Yoon Do-ha comes closer to it. At the door he turns back and looks at Yoo Jae-han. Yoon Do-ha's hands are in his shorts pockets. The man says that they will determine the winner later and asks the young man his name. Yu Jihan protects himself from the wind with his hand, raising it to eye level, his head slightly tilted forward. His gaze is confident and firm, his eyebrows slightly furrowed. His bangs fall over his face in a chaotic mess. The young man says that he is Yu Jihan from the Fun Guild. Yundoha smiles widely, his glasses shining. The light falls in such a way that the scar that crosses his eyebrow has become very visible. The second scar, which is located near his chin, is also clearly visible. Yundoha repeats the name of the guild. He looks at the guys who are trying to hide from the wind that the helicopter is picking up. Yu Jihan's jacket flutters behind him, and Kim Sihu is in the same situation. The man stands with his back proudly straight and a crystal in his left hand. The second is put in his pocket. He tells them to take the 4th class promotion test. The man takes his chin in his hand and looks ahead thoughtfully. A wide, thoughtful smile shines on his face. His eyebrows are slightly furrowed, causing small wrinkles to form on his forehead. He says he will personally recommend them. Yu Jihan and Kim Siu look at the man in front of them in surprise. They clearly did not expect such an offer. The young man slightly lowered his hand, which he used to shield himself from the wind, and holds it at chest level. Kim Sihu is standing nearby. Her mouth is slightly open, and you can read very strong surprise in her eyes. He asks why Yoon Do-ha decided to recommend them. The man holds his hand on the body of the helicopter and turned his head towards the guys. He smiles, glancing over his shoulder. He is already stepping onto the helicopter with one foot. Yoon Do-ha says that he just felt like it. The helicopter flies away from the monster territory. It rises high above the destroyed road. Yoon Do-ha sits inside the vehicle with his hands behind his head and his legs crossed. A wide smile with all 32 teeth shines on his face. His eyes are not visible, but it seems that he has closed them. The man looks relaxed and happy with what was happening in the monster's territory. A girl in a skirt stands next to him and, judging by the expression on her face, scolds the man. She holds onto the wall of the helicopter with one hand and raises the other up and clasps her fingers. He asks if she heard what he said. He asks her to write them a letter of recommendation. The girl indignantly says that the test is in 2 days. How can they send a letter right now? The girl opened her mouth in shock and widened her eyes, drops of sweat running down her face. She looks very surprised by what she just heard. She says that moreover, their Guild of Fun is not even registered to take this test. The man clasped his hands around his neck and threw his head up, a large bruise spreading on his arm. A long scratch appeared on his right hand. Yoon Do-ha is not bothered by this injury at all. He doesn't seem to notice it. The girl asks the man if he was wounded, and he adds how this is even possible. The man smiles widely, looking forward. His hands are still clenched around his neck. He looks very pleased and joyful. Yoon Do-ha says how much fun he has, repeating the phrase several times. The rickety sign for the Fun Guild still hangs over the window. Chan Same sits on the floor on his knees, his hands clenched into fists and resting on his legs. The young man looks down sadly, tears welling up in his eyes. He looks guilty, has dog ears on his head, and a tail visible behind his back. He looks like a naughty puppy being scolded by his owners. The young man hung his glasses around his neck. The top of his suit was tied around the guy's torso. He says he was wrong. Yu Jaehan stands over him, holding his hands threateningly in front of him. One of them is clenched into a fist. This gesture clearly does not bode well for Chan Same. There is an angry grin on the guy's face. Although he looks calm, he clearly does not experience pleasant emotions from the guy's actions. Kim Sihu stands next to him and looks at the young man with a serious expression on his face. Jang Same raised his hands in front of him, palms facing Yu Jaehan and Kim Sihu, beads of sweat running down his face. The guy's lips are pouty as he speaks and saliva comes out of his mouth. Yu Jaehan tells the guy to stop apologizing and get ready for a beating. Chan Same begs the young man to listen to him first. Chan Same raised his index finger in front of him, beads of sweat running down his face. There is an ingratiating smile on the young man's face. His eyebrows are slightly raised, and his uneven bangs fall onto his forehead. He says he overheard them talking about how they were going to take the 4th grade promotion test. Chan Same continues to sit on his knees in front of the Fun Guild, his shoulders slightly hunched. The young man still holds his outstretched index finger next to him. Sweat pours down Chan Same's face as the young man tries to convince the members of the Fun Guild. Kim Sihu crossed her arms over her chest and looked at the guy. Next to her is Yu Jaehan, who is also watching this performance. Chan Same says the test is in 2 days and asks if they should change their equipment now. Yu Jaehan asks him if he means changing weapons. Yu Jaehan holds his sword in his hand and presses it to himself. He lowered his head down and looked at the weapon in his hand. Chan Same says that it appears his sword has reached the end of its useful life, and the same goes for his other equipment. If they take the test like this, it will be a disaster. Chan Same hits himself in the chest with his palm. The young man opens his mouth wide, trying to convince Yu Jaehan and Kim Sihu. His eyebrows are slightly frowned and drawn down to the bridge of his nose. His gaze is confident and honest. The young man is a very good actor. This is not the first time he has shown this. He invites them to go to a workshop that he knows and sort it out and says that after that he will beat him. Kim Si-hoo looks at Yoo Ji-han, who also turned his head in her direction. She clutches her hand near her chest, as if confused. The young people look at each other as if silently discussing the proposal of the guilty Chan Sam. Yoo Ji-han orders Jang Sam to lead them. A colorful pink-orange sunset painted the sky. The sun reflects in the windows of the buildings, and several bright signs hang on the nearest building. Chan Sam put his huge backpack on his back again. He stands in the doorway and rests his hands on the frame on both sides. Behind him stands Yoo Ji-han and Kim Si-hoo. The young man seriously looks a little to the side. His lips are slightly pursed. His bangs fall on both sides of his face, but one strand is located in the middle of his forehead. He chuckles in surprise and questioningly. Chan Sam brought Yoo Ji-han and Kim Si-hoo to the workshop, where there are a lot of different equipment, armor and weapons. Near the wall there is a huge oven built of brick. In the middle of the room there is a huge table with small drawers. Yoo Ji-han says there is no one here. Kim Si-hoo threateningly clenches her hands into fists and looks at Jang Sam from under her brows. A purple glow appeared behind the girl's back, rippling out to the sides. The guy raised his hand up and nervously smiles at the angry girl. Kim Si-hoo asks him if this is one of his tricks. Chan Sam laughs and says no. Yoo Ji-han looks at Jang Sam standing right in front of him. The guy with the backpack raised his hands in front of him, palms up. Someone asks from the depths of the workshop who they are. A man with a long beard holds a heavy hammer in his hand. He says today is their day off. The man's arms are bulging with strong muscles, and his beard is tied in a small ponytail. A bun is tied on the blacksmith's head. The man is wearing a blue apron, which is belted with a leather belt. He threw the hammer over his shoulder, which looks quite menacing. He asks what brought them here. Someone is surprised that a dwarf blacksmith is standing in front of them. Dwarves are a race consisting of first-class blacksmiths. 3 short men stand against the backdrop of mountains. They are all dressed in clothes with leather elements. This is the race the hero wants to meet most. Various types of weapons hang in the air against the backdrop of space. All of them are made simply beautifully, from good and expensive materials. Dwarven weapons boast C-rank quality. Kim Si-hoo looks at the man in front of her with an enthusiastic expression. Yoo Ji-han stands nearby and also examines the man. Chan Sam turned his back to them and is about to leave, a malicious smile on his face. Kim Si-hoo says that this is her first time seeing a gnome. Yoo Ji-han says he does too. Kim Si-hoo turns her head towards the young man, a sweet smile on her face, eyes slightly narrowed. She tells Director Montana that he is not so bad. He led them to a workshop run by a dwarf. However, there was no one behind her. The girl looks at the empty space in surprise. She chuckles in surprise and asks where he went. Yoo Ji-han looks at the short man with a serious expression. Kim Si-hoo turned her head and glanced at the dwarf over her shoulder. The man laughed loudly and said that he was not a gnome. That was nonsense. The man stands with his chin proudly raised and his eyebrows quirkily arched. He clutches his hammer in his hand. He says he is a human being no less than a native Korean. Yoo Ji-han and Kim Si-hoo look at the blacksmith with great bewilderment and confusion. Their lips are tightly compressed, and the guy still frowns slightly. They are both surprised that there is a Korean in front of them. Yoo Ji-han points a finger at the man, and the girl standing next to him clenched her hand into a fist. They stand opposite the blacksmith, who is completely calm. Kim Si-hoo says he is lying. The man is definitely a gnome. Yoo Ji-han asks to see his ID. The man laughs loudly and calls them crazy. The man holds out an ID card in front of him, on which is pasted a photograph of him without a beard. The blacksmith looked slightly surprised. He encourages them to look at the ID. Yoo Ji-han and Kim Si-hoo are standing very close to each other, their cheeks touching, even slightly crushed against each other. They hold the blacksmith's ID in their hands and examine it closely. Kim Si-hoo says in disbelief that it's true. Yoo Ji-han asks to show it to him too. He holds the card in his hand and examines it. He asks what kind of photograph this is and is surprised that the blacksmith is 27 years old. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Ji-han turn to the blacksmith with faces as if they suspected something. The man looks at them with slight concern. Kim Si-hoo asks if this is a stolen ID, and Yoo Ji-han suggests that she inform the police. Kim Si-hoo holds her head with both hands, clearly angry. Yoo Ji-han looks at her with a relatively calm expression. The girl lets out a scream and says that this man from Montana tricked them again. Yoo Ji-han asks her to call the police. The male blacksmith frowned and looked at the guys in surprise. He asks them about the police, and asks them to wait, asks if he can look at the young man's sword. Yoo Ji-han looks at the man in front of him. The young man's mouth is slightly open. He asks in surprise about his sword. The man is holding a weapon in his hands that glows with a bright green light. There is slight surprise on his face. He carefully examines the sword. He is surprised and asks them to look at these marks. The man looked up from his sword and looked at the young man. His eyebrows are slightly drawn down to the bridge of his nose. The man's gaze is very intent and serious. He asks Yu Jihan half affirmatively if he is a wind elementalist. Yu Jihan stands opposite the blacksmith, with one hand extended in front of him. The young man looks shocked. He asks the man in surprise how he knew. He replies that a first-class blacksmith can guess the owner of the sword by the marks on it. A man is holding a sword in his hand, the blade of which has quite a lot of cracks. He says that, unfortunately, this sword could not withstand the force of the elements. The young man continues to stand in one place, and the blacksmith has moved to the wall and is looking at the stand with weapons. He asks to give him a minute. He has the perfect weapon for elementalists. The man reports that he found it. The blacksmith approached Yu Jihan and handed him a sheathed sword with a sparkling gem on the hilt. The blacksmith says that this is a sword that unites the elements. Yu Jihan took the weapon out of its sheath and held it out in front of him. He examines the blade with surprise and enthusiasm, which immediately glows blue. The man says that this is Nam Ho Yol's sword. Kim Si-Hu looks at them, her eyebrows arched in surprise. She asks the blacksmith if he named the sword after himself. So time flew by, and the day of the promotion exam arrived. The tall building is made of bricks of different colors and stands illuminated by the sun. A man in brown clothes reaches for the handle on the door. There are a huge number of people in the building. Yu Jihan and Kim Si-Ho stand in the doorway and look around the room. People are huddled together and communicating. Kim Si-Hu looks around, a bead of sweat running down her face. The girl looks a little nervous and anxious. Yu Jihan, on the contrary, is completely calm. The girl says that there are a lot of people there. Yu Jihan looks ahead, his lips pressed tightly together. The young man looks thoughtful. He thinks about how the 4th rank test took place so long ago. When he was still in the Kara's guild, there were also a lot of people. Kim Si-Hu and Yu Jihan turned to look at the man, who is smiling widely, raising his hand to his face. He was very surprised by something and said that this could drive you crazy. He and his friend are standing next to each other, talking with wide grins. Yu Jihan and Kim Si-Hu walk past them, their hands clenched into fists. One of the guys asks if Yu Jinhan is the one who was kicked out of the Kara's guild. Who would have thought that he would show up in this exam? The other guy says that if he were Yu Jinhan, he would be too ashamed to continue pretending to be a hero. Yu Jihan looks calm, completely unaffected by the gossiper's words. Kim Si-Hu approached him and raised her hand up. She asked the young man if they were talking about him. He replies that let them talk. People tend to judge others when they are together. Yu Jihan thinks that he feels relieved anyway. He remembers how Yoon Do-ha attacked him from behind. He feels relieved that there are no rumors about what happened in Bucheon. He needs to hide the fact that he is an elementalist for as long as possible. The young man looks forward seriously, his lips pursed. Nothing good will come of it if he attracts too much attention. Someone's voice is heard in the room. The person orders to be silent. People who came for the test turn back in surprise. They all look a little perplexed. The same person says they made such a fuss over a simple promotion test. A man in a business suit walks forward with a badge hanging around his neck. He calls on everyone to come to their senses. Yu Jihan looks at this man without surprise, rather with slight displeasure. The young man's eye glows blue again as he uses his ability. The man says that they are the most ordinary. They are not very smart people who cannot even compare with the average level. The man stopped in front of the young man, their shoes almost touching. The man looks down on Yu Jihan with obvious contempt. He says that in a word they are people with low skill levels. This person is a level 4 examiner, and his name is Yuan Yun-sik. Yu Jihan looks up at the man, his gaze sparkling with anger. He suspects that Yoon Do-ha arranged all this. The young man used his ability to calculate probability. The examiner stands surrounded by green cells. The ability tells you that there is a 1% chance of passing the test. The examiner turns to Yu Jai-Hwan and asks if he thinks so. The young man thinks about whether Yoon Do-ha actually wrote the letter of recommendation. A man opens a yellow bag. The veins on his arms were very swollen. Someone calls Yoon Do-ha's name. A man sits on the sofa and pours the contents of the bag into a glass. His legs are spread wide apart and he has a concentrated and slightly gloomy expression on his face. A girl in a suit stands behind him and clutches a blue folder. She says that she sent a letter of recommendation for a 4th grade promotion to the team Yoon Do-ha was talking about. The man is surprised that she has already done this. The girl carefully examines the documents in the folder. She holds the top sheet with one hand. She talks about something that seems strange to her. On the sheet that is in the folder there is a photograph of the examiner, with his data written next to it. The girl asks Yoon Do-ha why he chose Yoon-sik as the examiner. The huge room, the walls and floor of which are covered with gray tiles, is absolutely empty. There is only one mirror visible on the wall. This is the venue for the 4th grade exam. 2 young men are quickly running somewhere, waving their arms in the air. One of them has a sword, which he pulled behind his back. The young people approach the examiner, intending to attack him. The man looks relaxed, with one hand in his pocket and a sword in the other. Yoon-sik's eyes glow red and her lips are pressed tightly together. 3 people are swinging their weapons at the examiner. They approached him almost point blank. Yoon-sik says that studying the examiner first and then attacking him immediately after the battle begins is a very reckless strategy. The man's face is hidden in shadow. His bright red eyes stand out. There are many blue flashes sparkling near him. The young people who were about to attack the examiner flew into the air. The weapon has fallen from their hands, and they themselves are waving their limbs in the air. The examiner has grabbed the hilt of the sword in a special way, and stands with his back to the guys. He calls them all stupid. A human body in a red jacket lies before the examiner's feet. Behind the man there are 2 more guys. They seem to be unconscious. The examiner stands with his feet shoulder-width apart. In his hand is a sword, which he lowered with the tip down. The 12th team failed the test. 3 people stand near a large window that can be mistaken for a mirror. One of them has his arms crossed over his chest, the second has his hand in his pocket, and the third is a little to the side. Some of them are outraged out loud. A young man and a girl stand in front of a viewing window. They watch the test together. He asks if Yoon-sik has gone too far. The girl doubts that anyone will be able to pass the exam. The young man smiles widely. There are several earrings in his ear and gold inserts along the edges of his clothes. He says 5th grade wannabes are all like that. This man's name is Kim Han-seok, and he is a 4th grade examiner. The girl closed her eyes tiredly and put her fingers to her forehead. Her chin is slightly lowered and her eyebrows are furrowed. She is upset about what is happening and does not understand how she can report this to higher management. The girl is also a 4th grade examiner, and her name is Ohio-in. The third person standing near the observation window is a guy. He is wearing a hood, and the mask hides the lower half of his face. He says that now there will be the last command. This is 4th grade examiner Seo Jun-woo. There are photographs of Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Ji-hen on a white background. They are a little fuzzy and covered in multicolored noise, but you can still clearly distinguish facial features. Someone looks at them and says out loud the name of the Fun Guild. M. Han-seok stands next to Seo Jun-woo. The young man has a wide smile on his face. They are staring at something. Kim Han-seok says out loud that it must be them. The 3 examiners stand in front of Yoo Ji-hun's photo and look at it. Kim Han-seok says that these guys were recommended by their guild leader. All the examiners are part of the Dice Guild. The young man and a girl are heading somewhere with a confident step. Yellow and black markings are applied to the bottom of the walls. One of the examiners says that the Guild of Fun will have a hard time. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Ji-hun enter the room where the test is being conducted. The girl looks around, clutching her staff. The young man looks confident in his abilities, clutching a new sword in his hand. Kim Han-seok looks forward with his chin slightly raised. There is a small smile on his face. He is looking at something with interest. Kim Han-seok says that this person has no flexibility. Yoon-sik stands in the middle of the exam room. One of his hands holds a long sword. The man looks slightly away from those who entered. Behind him, in the air, there is a white haze. One of the examiners says he meant the head of their team. The man turns his gloomy and contemptuous gaze towards those who entered. There are large black bruises under his eyes and his eyebrows are furrowed. Yoon-sik is the head of the Dice Guild team. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Ji-hen head inside, the open door shining white behind them. Yoon-sik stands facing them without changing his position. Someone greets those entering the 4th grade examination hall, and he says that for the next 5 minutes they will fight with the examiner. The passing requirement is fulfilled the moment you either completely defeat the examiner or receive confirmation from him. Yoon-sik looks at the members of the Fun Guild with a very gloomy and dissatisfied look. He still remains in the same position. Yoo Ji-hen looks at the examiner from under his brows and reaches out with his hand to the sword, about to take it out of its sheath. Kim Si-hoo stands behind the young man. She clenched one hand into a fist and brought it to her chest. The girl is indignant and angry. Her mouth is wide open due to screaming. Her eyebrows are furrowed. She exclaims how they think the 5th grade team can beat the examiner. The examiner's eyes glowed red again, half of his face hidden in shadow. The man looks at his opponents from under his brows. Everything behind him is painted red. Someone thinks that Yoon-sik must have fought with many teams, but there is not even a scratch on him. Kim Si-hoo stands behind Yoo Ji-hen and looks at the young man. He holds his hands in front of him and watches the enemy. Yoo Ji-hen asks Kim Si-hoo to help him from behind, like in monster territory. The girl agrees and says that she understood him. The young man's eye glowed blue, and an aura of the same color hovered around him. He takes the sword out of its sheath. The stone on the hilt shines brightly. Yoo Ji-hen says it won't be an easy battle. The young man tensed and stood in a fighting stance. He holds one hand in front of him, the other is pulled back. Kim Si-hoo is standing nearby. She has more comfortably grabbed the staff and is looking towards the examiner. Someone announces that the 4th grade exam is starting right now. Yoon-sik approached the guild members and swung his foot at Yoo Ji-hen. The young man took the attack at the point of his sword. A bright blue flash appears in the air. Yoo Jae-han clenched his teeth tightly and showed his teeth nervously. He looks tensely and with some fear at the blade of his sword. The young man makes a strangled noise from the examiner's attack. He thinks about how Yoon-sik attacked him right after the start. At the sight of their collision, a huge cloud of dust and a bright blue flash appeared. The examiner's fist flies towards Kim Si-hoo's face, who tries to dodge. Her mouth is wide open in a scream, a bead of sweat running down her face. The girl looks nervously to the side, raising one hand in the air. She shouts Yoo Jae-han's name loudly. The man's fist misses the target. It hits the blue energy. He has a bright blue aura around him. The man looks in bewilderment at his hand, which is engulfed in blue light. He wonders out loud what happened. A blue barrier appeared around the girl, holding back the examiner's attack. Kim Si-hoo stands with her legs spread wide and holds a staff in front of her. The man is surprised that his blow is blocked. Yoon-sik glances in the other direction, his eyebrows furrowed. The eyes burn with a bright red fire. Yoo Jae-han sits near the rubble of the room, holding his hand out in front of him. He uses the elementalist's ability to block the blow. The man thinks that the letter of recommendation turned out to be not fake. Yoon-sik swings his leg and with a sharp, strong movement kicks Kim Si-hoo to the side. The girl bent over in flight and put her hands in front of her, probably in an attempt to defend herself. The man's leg rests on the floor of the room. Blue energy glows around it. Yoon-sik swings his hand, holding the sword with the other. It seems that his eyes began to glow even brighter. The examiner approaches Yoo Jae-han. The man held his sword in front of him, attacking the young man. The blue aura of his elemental glows around Yoo Jae-han. The young man stands with his legs spread wide and his sword extended in front of him. Yoo Jae-han holds back the examiner's pressure, their swords crossed. The young man's teeth are clenched tightly from tension. He thinks that it is hard for him. Yoo Jae-han cannot believe that a wooden sword can cause so much damage. First, he needs to increase his distance. The young man looks intently in front of him, eyes wide open. His brows are furrowed and his mouth is twisted from the tension and severity of the blow. Yoo Jae-han uses Windy Night and knocks the examiner back. He groups himself in the air, folding his arms in a special way. Yoo Jae-han stands with his arm extended forward, blue ribbons of power emanating from it. The man turns over in the air, leans on the floor and lands softly on both feet. Yoon-sik looks at the young man with a dissatisfied look. The man leans on his knee and sword, one of his arms is behind his back. He is somewhat surprised that Yoo Jae-han has wind magic. Yoon-sik thinks that the young man has a very annoying talent. Yoo Jae-han used acceleration and found himself behind the examiner. The young man jumped at him, swinging his sword. The man looks ahead, but notices movement. He looks to the side, his pupils vertically elongated. The man's eyes light up red again. Yoon-do-ha sits on the sofa with his back to the girl in the suit. She looks at him, clutching the blue folder to her chest. The girl asks Yoon-do-ha why he chose Yoon-sik as the examiner. And then he asks another question. If Yoon-do-ha writes something like a letter of recommendation, wouldn't that work for them? Hard times await the Fun Guild. The man beams with a wide smile, and on his face are already familiar glasses that hide his eyes. Yoon-do-ha brought the glass to his mouth and is about to take a sip. He says he chose Yoon-sik because he is one of a kind. The examiner smiles widely and a little madly. He looks creepy and malevolent, holding a sword in his hand. He is a one-of-a-kind wind-cutting swordsman. Yoon-sik uses an ability called Rapid Sword Flow. A huge number of sword strikes from the examiner fly towards Yoo Jae-han. He used a fast blade to cut the flax. The young man stumbled back, waving his arms in the air. There is a grimace of pain on his face. Many blows reached their target. They fell on Yoo Jae-han, cutting clothes and causing wounds. Blood splashes in all directions. A young man sits on the floor of an examination room. Yoon-sik stands in front of him and smiles widely. Yoo Jae-han tilted his head down, a lot of blood flowing from his mouth. He thinks that now he is not as fast as before. He remembers his fight with the basilisks, a battle with a huge and rare variety of birds. And the fight with Yoon-do-ha, he remembers how he pressed his face to the ground. He still feels the effects of his past battles with the basilisk and Yoon-do-ha. The sword in Yoo Jae-han's hand glows bright blue. The young man clutches the handle tightly. He thinks that for some time now this sword has begun to consume an incredible amount of mana. The examiner looks down at the young man, a contemptuous grimace on his face. The man's eyebrows are drawn to the bridge of his nose, his eyes still glow red. He asks Yoo Jae-han if he got Yoon-do-ha's letter of recommendation just because of this skill. Kim Si-hoo is high in the air behind the examiner. She put a staff in front of her, around which a circle with runes was burning. The girl points it directly at the examiner. She yells at him to leave Yoo Jae-han behind. A bright blue flash illuminates the place where Yoon-sik had just stood. The man himself flies away from the young man, who is still sitting on the floor. Kim Si-hoo, wearing black pumps, lands on the floor. She stands in front of Yoo Jae-han, protecting him. The girl holds the staff behind her back, creating an additional shield. Yoo Jae-han leaned his body forward slightly and opened his mouth wide. The young man calls Kim Si-hoo by name. The girl asks him to leave everything to her. Kim Si-hoo looks confidently and seriously at her opponent. The girl's lips are tightly compressed. Her hair is a little messed up and looks more messy after this attack. Kim Si-hoo thinks that she can't hide behind Yoo Jae-hun forever. She has to do this. The examiner stands opposite her, holding his sword at the ready. Judging by the man's appearance, it is clear that he feels like he is in charge of the situation and is not afraid of attacks from guild members. Yoon-sik asks Kim Si-hoo if she is backing down and calls the girl stupid. She tells him that she is not stupid. Kim Si-hoo smiles slightly as she brushes a strand of hair away from her head with one hand, revealing her pointy ear. The girl looks directly and confidently at her opponent. She says that she is the head of the Fun Guild and gives her name. Yoon-sik smirks, but his brows are still furrowed. His cheekbones stand out very strongly on his face. He is surprised and asks the girl if she is an elf. Kim Si-hoo quickly runs towards the examiner, waving his arms. The girl's mouth is wide open. Her gaze is confident. The man thinks about how Kim Si-hoo is distinguished from a simple magician who dared to attack him. The man uses some kind of skill. It's as if his hands become several times larger, and with all of them he makes an attack. The blue flash of several best is between the man and the girl. Yoon-sik says that as expected, Kim Si-hoo is stupid. The girl closed her eyes, blue flashes of magic flying around her. The man thinks that the elves can hear the flow of mana. The man's attack is directed towards the girl, who is rapidly moving between the blue streams of power. The girl arched her eyebrows and seemed to be smiling slightly as she pointed the staff at the examiner. A blue magic circle with runes appeared again around the weapon. Kim Si-hoo uses the arrow of time. The girl stands at some distance from the man. She points a staff in his direction. A blue arrow is released from the weapon and flies towards the examiner. The man didn't even stagger back. He repelled the girl's attack with a slight movement of his hand. He says it's ridiculous and asks if she really thought it would work at such close range. A magic circle with runes appears behind Yoon-sik. It illuminates part of the man's face. The examiner seems somewhat surprised and tense. He turned around sharply and deflected the circle's blow with his sword. Blue streams of power from both sides are directed towards the man. He exclaims that Kim Si-hoo prepared only one blow. 2 more magic circles appeared behind the man. The examiner notices them too. The man looks concentrated. He is surprised that a 5th grader is using such a difficult skill. Now streams of blue magic are directed at the man from 4 sides. He swings his sword in the air furiously and very quickly, deflecting them. The man's eyebrows furrow even more. He looks straight ahead. The examiner stands with his feet wide apart and his arms out to the sides. Above it are 6 magic circles that the girl created. He is amazed that the girl uses hex magic. The man lowered his head and looked at his feet. 2 rough hands grabbed him and held him in place. He mentally denies his own words. The girl uses 7-sided magic. Kim Si-hoo used the ability to slow down the wind. The man stands surrounded by magic circles and with his legs clenched. His arms are spread wide apart, as if he is trying to maintain his balance. Yoon-sik thinks about being caught. A bright blue flash appears at the place where the examiner stood. Clouds of dust arising from the impact rise into the air. Kim Si-hoo stands opposite and shields himself from the bright light and dust with his hand. She holds the staff in combat readiness. Closing one eye, she watches what is happening in front of her. Kim Si-hoo thinks that the man had a good time, even if he is an examiner. Yoon-sik grins widely and contentedly, dust flying in the air around him. He says it wasn't bad. Closing the distance and cornering him was a good move. The man stands behind the girl and holds a sword near her neck. Large drops of sweat are running down Kim Si-hoo's face. She looks scared and clearly did not expect an attack from behind. Yoon-sik says the attack was too slow. Kim Si-hoo's eyes are wide open. She is surprised and amazed at what happened. Drops of sweat run down the girl's face. She wonders to herself that the examiner blocked the 7-sided magic. The man continues to stand behind the girl, but he does not look at her. The man's gaze is directed at Yoo Jae-hun, who is some distance away from them. A young man stands in a fighting stance with a sword in his hands. The examiner asks when Yoo Jae-hun will attack him. The young man tightly grips the hilt of the sword with both hands. Yoo Jae-hun is not smiling and looks tired, but very serious. He tells the man that he will lose because of his arrogance. Yoo Jae-hun holds a sword in his hands, which is enveloped in a blue glow of magic. There are streams of greenish-blue power floating around the young man. He thinks that this sword cannot absorb mana. He just spent almost all of it. Yoo Jae-hun's eye lights up blue and the young man swings his sword. More and more power floats around him. He thinks about collecting what remains he can and bears the blow. The young man raises his sword high, from which a huge column of greenish-blue magic emanates. It fills most of the space. Yoo Jae-hun used the wind blade. In the room there are several cabinets with transparent doors, behind which awards are located. Many different cups and medals, some vases and figurines. A stately man in a business suit stands near the window. He folds his hands behind his back and looks at the city. He invites someone to enter the office. A blond man with bright blue eyes holds a folder in front of him and flips through documents. He says he brought a report on the status of Kim Hyun-tae's team for today. The owner of the office continues to stand in front of the window, with his hands folded behind his back. He turned his head to the side and chuckled thoughtfully. The blond man stands some distance from his boss. The man continues to watch what is happening outside the window. He asks if Kang-woo is feeling well. The blonde asks again and says the man's full name, Kim Kang-woo. The man frowns, a stern expression on his face. A white background with various inscriptions appears behind the man's back, like someone's dossier. This person is the head of the Keros Guild. His name is Jun Seob. He's talking about the guy he sent to Kim Hyun-tae's team after Yoo Jae-han was kicked out. The blond man stands behind the boss and closely examines the contents of the documents. The guild leader continues to look out the window with a serious expression on his face. The blond boy reports that the results of the study indicate that he is still in the adjustment stage and appears somewhat unbalanced. Jun Seob says that Kim Hyun-tae will stabilize his condition himself because this guy is much more useful than Yoo Jae-han. The blonde continues to look at the folder with documents. He nervously squeezes one of the sheets. Sweat is pouring down the young man's face. It's clear that he is worried. He says that he has some information about Yoo Jae-han. The guild leader asks a silent question, demanding to continue. Jun Seob doesn't change his position, but his arms and back become very tense. A blue-violet glow appears around him and the room seems to be plunged into darkness. The blonde says that it has become known that Yoo Jae-han has passed the 4th grade promotion exam. The head of the guild is clearly surprised by this news. He turned towards the blonde, the man's eyebrows furrowed. He clenches his hands tightly into fists and looks unhappy. He is loudly surprised that Yoo Jae-han, who couldn't get a single letter of recommendation, passed the promotion test. At the same time, the head of the guild calls the young man various not very flattering words. The blonde says that Yoo Jae-han received a letter of recommendation from Yoon Do-ha. Jun Seob purses his lips tightly and frowns with displeasure. Half of the man's face is hidden in shadow. White light illuminates him from behind. A wooden sword lies on the floor of the test room. It is broken into many pieces. Someone is surprised out loud by what happened. Yoo Jae-han stands next to the examiner and puts a sword to his neck. A man sits on the floor, leaning on his hands. Next to it is a deep and long furrow from a sword strike. A young man looks down at his opponent. Yoo Jae-han's eye continues to shine with blue light. His lips press tightly together. A man sits on the floor and twists his mouth in displeasure. His face is covered in abrasions and dust. His eyes are narrowed and his gaze is directed directly at the guy. Yoon-sik suddenly smiles widely, his mouth parted. There are also abrasions on his neck. The man lets out a quiet laugh. He thinks that he was curious to know how Yoo Jae-han was able to get a letter of recommendation from Yoon Do-ha. Yoo Jae-han continues to hold the sword in front of the examiner. The man lowered his head down. He is still sitting on the floor. Behind the young man's back is his elemental, which illuminates the space with green-blue light. The examiner admits defeat and says he gives up. The man thinks that sending an elementalist to the exam is cheating. There are several machines and banners near the transparent entrance doors. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-han are sitting on the sofa. The young man put his hand on the armrest and leaned back. His eyes are squeezed shut and his mouth is wide open. Kim Se-hoo sits next to him, her back bent and her head down. Yoo Jae-han exhales loudly and says that he thinks he will survive. Kim Se-hoo suddenly perks up and looks at the young man happily. The girl clenched her fists near her chest, stars shining in her eyes. Yoo Jae-han does not look at the girl. His gaze is directed in the other direction. Kim Se asks Yoo Jae-han who he is and how he learned to use elemental magic so quickly. Every time he shows a new technique. Yoo Jae-han replies that he doesn't even know. The young man opened his palm and raised his hand slightly. He looks at her carefully, thinking about something. Yoo Jae-han feels that he has become closer to elemental magic thanks to this battle. He remembers Yoon Do-ha and how he smiled when he left the guys. The young man mentally asks himself the question, maybe this is exactly what Yoon Do-ha had in mind. Kim Se-hoo looks at the young man with a wide smile, her cheeks slightly red. Yoo Jae-han examines his interlocutor with a benevolent grin. Small white flowers fly near the girl's head. Yoo Jae-han tells Kim Se-hoo that she was great too. They were able to win because the girl distracted the examiner. Kim Se-hoo laughs contentedly and says that this is nothing. The young man becomes serious. He glances to the side. He says they somehow won the exam battle. The transparent doors opened wide and several people came out. Two of them are dressed in armor. The men hold swords in their hands. Behind them is a girl in a long red skirt with a backpack strapped to her back. and a little ahead of the whole company is a tall blonde man in a blue suit. He praises the others and says they did a good job. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-hun still have an exam interview left. The young man is sitting relaxed on the sofa, and the girl, on the contrary, is very tense. She pressed her palms between her legs and straightened her back. Opposite them are men in armor. Someone calls the next ones and asks the Fun Guild to pass. 3 people sit at a long white table, with folders laid out in front of them and bottles of water standing in front of them. A girl with glasses is looking at something in the documents. The man who sits next to her holds a brown folder in his hands. The girl says that the previous team prepared a lot. The man sitting next to him continues and says that their exam battle was also interesting. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-hun walked into a room where 3 people were sitting. A girl and a man in a brown suit look only at the documents, leafing through them. The third member of the commission folded his arms and watched the members of the Fun Guild enter. A man in a brown suit looks at what is written in the documents with a joyful smile. With one hand he holds the top sheet. He says that if there are no objections, then they will move forward. However, he did not finish the sentence. Kim Se-hoo stands behind Yoo Jae-hun. The young people become hidden in the shadows, as if clouds were gathering over them. Someone loudly denies and demands to be expelled. A man in a red turtleneck with sparse facial hair says that the tank was too hesitant. In this situation he will definitely panic when they are attacked. This man is a member of the Warriors Guild. His name is Dong-ho. He crumpled the paper in his hands, making a smooth ball out of it. The man's face is unpleasantly twisted in mocking laughter. He asks about the fact that this team can be the 4th class. It's just ridiculous. Yoo Jae-hun looks at the commission members with a serious and thoughtful look. He does not betray any emotions. Someone from the commission says that in this case the guild failed the promotion. The second person laughs and says that in that case no one will get it. Yoo Jae-hun thinks about how they speak as if they want them to hear it. The commission members turn their attention to those who entered. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-hun are sitting in the chairs in front of them. They are addressed as interviewers and asked to sit down. The guys say hello and introduce themselves as the Fun Guild. A man in a brown suit looks at the documents with bewilderment. He picked up one piece of paper with his hand and reads something. The man looked up and looked at Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-hun, confusion written on his face. He asks them if, among all the teams that took part this time, they are the only ones who passed the exam battle, and he adds that this is very surprising. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-hun have smiles on their faces. However, on the girl's face she is nervous and tense, but the young man smiles sincerely. He says they flatter them. He thinks they are just lucky. The girl laughs a little awkwardly and thanks. A man in a brown suit smiles widely, squinting his eyes. Dong-ho sits with his cheek resting on his fist. One of the man's eyebrows is arched and his lips are drawn forward. The committee member is surprised that the 2 of them pulled it off against the examiner, and adds that he doesn't think they need to check the interview about this. Dong-ho hums thoughtfully. The man extends his hand forward and points his index finger at the guild members. He asks to look at Kim Se-hoo's ears. Kim Se-hoo breaks out in a nervous sweat, but reaches out with her hands to tuck her hair behind her ears. Yoo Jae-hun looks at the commission members carefully. The man says that the girl's hairstyle looks very boring. She agrees with him and says that she understands. Kim Se-hoo pulled her hair back and revealed her pointy ears. The girl looked down, as if embarrassed, drops of sweat running down her face. The man asks what they have here. He continues to sit, resting his cheek and looking at the girl with interest. A red aura seemed to appear around him, which also engulfed Kim Se-hoo. He says out loud that the girl is a half-elf. Dong-ho licks his lips disgustingly as he looks at the girl. The corners of his eyebrows are raised upward and his eyes are slightly squinted. He says that he thought that Kim Se-hoo was a purebred and the fact that this is not the case is a great disappointment to him. Other members of the commission look with shock and indignation at the man, who smiles joyfully and widely. A man in a brown suit asks him to watch his words. Dong-ho removed his hand from his face, but continues to hold it in place. He looks at the young man, turning his head slightly in his direction. The man asks for forgiveness and says that he did it out of habit, without knowing it. Yoo Jae-hun sits in a chair, his arms very tense. Veins bulge on them. The young man pursed his lips tightly and frowned at the commission. He is asked to relax. The young man mentally calls Dong-ho names very unflatteringly. Kim Se-hoo takes the young man's forearm with both hands and turns towards him. Yoo Jae-hun is so tense that even the veins on his neck are bulging, and his lips are twisted viciously. Kim Se-hoo says everything is fine. The young man lowered his hands, clenched into fists, onto his knees. He closed his eyes and lowered his chin slightly. Yoo Jae-hun exhaled loudly. He thinks about holding back. An unpleasant commission member looks at the members of the Fun Guild with a wide smile. The man's eyebrows are still arched upward. He suggests continuing the interview. Yoo Jae-hun thinks that he cannot succumb to such provocations. The girl from the commission looks at the folder. She runs her hand over the sheets of paper and reads carefully. He says that Kim Si-hoo's father, whose name is Kim Guno, works at a monster research institute in Kyoto and asks if this information is correct. Kim Si-hoo confirms and says that everything is false. The girl looks at Yoo Jae-han carefully. The young man smiles slightly, looking directly at her. A member of the commission says that they recently caught a mutated basilisk in the territory of the monsters. Yoo Jae-han confirms and says that's exactly what happened. The girl from the commission turns her head towards the man who is sitting next to her. Her hands are on the table, one is on the yellow folders. She is surprised and talks about a new guild of 2 people, wants to continue the phrase, but she is interrupted. Dong-ho gets Kim Si-hoo's attention by calling her a half-elf. The man clasped his hands and laid his head on them. He looks at the guild members from under his brows, an unpleasant grin on his face. He says that in 10 years of being a hero, this is the first time he has seen a half-elf create a guild. He continues to smile disgustingly, opening his mouth wide when talking. The man says there is something he would like to know from her. Commission members and guild members sit opposite each other. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han folded their hands on their knees. It is clear that they feel uncomfortable here. Dong-ho asks which side the girl will be on if South Korea is ever attacked by elves. The girl looks at the man with pursed lips. Sweat is pouring down her face and she looks nervous. A blue glow appears behind her head with white streaks on it. She says she doesn't want to talk about it. The man looks unhappy. He continues to hold his head on his folded hands. He asks her again, as if he didn't hear the answer. Yoo Jae-han clenched his hands tightly into fists again and looked at the man with anger. Kim Si-hoo turned her head towards the young man and looked at him with her mouth wide open. Yoo Jae-han asks the man if this is exactly how the war guild trains its members. Kim Si-hoo nervously calls his name. The young man is clearly angry with the man's statements. He looks at him from under his brows. He says that until this moment they all didn't care about promotion. He only continued to attack the head of their guild. The commission was shocked by the young man's words. The man in the brown suit and the girl opened their mouths wide and held out their hands as if trying to defend themselves. Dong-ho punched the table, causing a dent in the surface. The man shouts angrily that it is up to him to decide. The commission member walked up to Dong-ho and put his hand on his back. The man's mouth snarls angrily. His clenched fist continues to lie on the table. A man in a brown suit asks to stop what is happening now. Yoo Jae-han says that instead of hearing humiliation about the guild, he would rather refuse the promotion. The young man says all this, looking furiously at the commission. Kim Si-hoo looks at the young man and extends his hand to him, trying to stop him. Drops of sweat are running down her face. She is very worried. Insults and requests to calm down are heard in the room. Someone asks if they came here today to fight. Kim Si-hoo clenched her hand into a fist and pulled him closer to her. Her eyes are closed and tears are already gathering at the corners. The lower lip is bitten, as if the girl is trying to restrain herself from crying. She thinks about how they screwed up. The sign of the Guild of Fun is still shabby and does not hang straight. Kim Si-hoo is wearing a light white tank top, gray sweatpants and a brown cardigan. She drinks something from a white paper cup. Yoo Jae-han walked up to her and put his hands behind his head. Kim Si-hoo turned her head towards the young man with a smile. Yoo Jae-han apologizes and says that they failed the promotion because of him. Kim Si-hoo exhales and says everything is fine. The cardigan slipped off one of the girl's arms, exposing her shoulder. Kim Si-hoo looks down in the direction of Yoo Jae-han, a glass clutched in her hand. She says she is grateful to the young man for standing up for her. Yoo Jae-han looks at the girl with some surprise. The corners of his eyebrows are raised upward. His eyes are wide open. The girl says this was the first time someone stood up for her. Yoo Jae-han calls her name. He stands next to the girl, looking down at her with a guilty expression on his face. The girl turned her head away from the young man and reached her hand towards the keyboard to press the button. Yoo Jae-han asks her if she says so, then why does she keep pressing the refresh button? The girl looks a little nervously to the side. Yoo Jae-han looks embarrassed and guilty. He narrows his eyes and bares his mouth nervously. The monitor screen displays a loading icon and a message indicating that the list of those who passed the exam is loading. Kim Si-hoo says she just wants to see who passed. Yoo Jae-han apologizes to her again, speaking that he's really sorry. The girl is leaning towards the monitor screen. One of her hands is on the keyboard, and the other is holding the computer mouse. Yoo Jae-han also looks at the monitor, his hand clenched into a fist. Kim Si-hoo exclaims that the page has loaded. Yoo Jae-han exhales a little sadly. The young man leans over the girl. They look at the screen together. Great surprise is written on their faces. The girl's mouth is generally wide open. She reads about the team that passed the 4th grade promotion exam, but doesn't finish reading it. Some of the guys are very surprised when they say the question out loud. Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han look at each other nervously, beads of sweat running down their faces. Their lips are pressed tightly together and their eyes are wide open, as if they don't believe what they just saw. A man stands near the window and throws an apple with one hand. The second hand is tucked into the pocket. Members of the commission stand behind him. The man asks Dong-ho what he was thinking about. He catches the apple and turns his head slightly to the side. Dong-ho apologizes for what he caused. He throws the apple into the air again. There is a wide smile on the man's face, which hints that he is not at all ashamed of his words. He says he went a little overboard and was curious. He caught the apple and holds it in his hand. The rays of the sun fall on the fruit, illuminating it. He wonders out loud how big the Fun Guild will eventually be. The man took a bite from the apple and raised his head up. His brows are furrowed and apple juice is running down his lips. Overall, he has a very unpleasant expression on his face. He thinks that they are arrogant and adds that they should try to climb to the top as much as they can. Kim Se-hoo and Yoo Jae-han are in front of a computer with a results page open. The young man leaned forward and held the girl's chair with his hand. He is surprised by what is written there. Dong-ho thinks that upstairs he is going to destroy them. There are several guild names written on the results page, including the Fun Guild. Yoo Jae-han is surprised at what they went through. Part of the city is fenced off with a blue barrier. From the outside, everything looks quite peaceful, with smooth streets and multi-story buildings with bright signs. This is Paju, Gyeonggi Province, second-class monster territory. The black bus is in the parking lot. Everything inside him glows white. There are a lot of people sitting on the bus. Some are taking photographs, lighting up the space with flashes, and some are holding posters in their hands. One of them has a pink heart on it. The bus door opened slightly and someone was sitting near the steps. Kim Henti and the rest of his team are confidently heading somewhere. As usual, I hope the man has a long cloak and armor. Someone from the audience exclaims that this is Kim Henti's team. The man is asked to look in their direction. Many girls crowd around a man in a suit. He blocks their path and holds back the pressure. There are cheers from the crowd. The man asks them not to put pressure and to disappear while calling the girls unflattering names. Kim Henti approached him with a beaming, good-natured smile and narrowed eyes. The man grabbed the hand of the man who was trying to restrain the girls. Kim Hyunti asks him what he is doing. A sweet smile shines on the red-haired man's face. He looks very joyful and friendly. He addresses the fans and thanks them for coming to support them. He says they might get hurt and asks them to watch from afar. Kim Henti's team heads towards the barrier. The man raised one hand up and turned his head slightly to the side. The rest of the team calmly walks forward. There are shouts from the crowd that Kim Henti is very cute. The fans wish the team good luck. A man walks through the barrier, his legs wrapped in blue ribbons of power. Kim Henti stopped smiling as soon as he disappeared from the fans' eyes. His eyebrows are furrowed as usual, and his mouth curls with displeasure. He says these people are very noisy and get on his nerves. The team tank looks at its commander, who is walking slightly to the side. Behind them lie the remains of buildings. Tank says there were more people today than yesterday. Kim Hyunti wonders how they find out and show up like this every time. The team leader turns his head to the side and glances over his shoulder. Someone asks him if Kim Henti saw the woman in front of the entrance. Behind the man stands a young man in a black Panama hat. He brought his hand to his face and blew into it. This man's name is Kim Kang-woo and he is a member of Team Kim Henti. Kim Kang-woo says that woman was so ugly that he almost vomited. Kim Henti is in front of everyone, with Kim Kang-woo and H. Wang Jun-ho behind him. The tank looks with disapproval at the young guy, who smiles happily. Kim Kang asks the leader what kind of women he likes. Kim Henti is quite laconic and answers that are cute. Kim Kang-woo closed his eyes, a wide smile on his face. The young man's hair is gray and reaches his shoulders. Kim Kang says he's bringing some pretty girls this weekend and asks why don't they go to a club. Behind the guy are Im-zin and Lee-mia. The magician looks at the newcomer angrily and indignantly. He tells him that he and Lee-mia are actually here and asks him to stop talking about it in front of them. Kim Kang turns back and raises his hand, palm up, with the same smile on his face. He asks Im-zin why don't they join them. The girl indignantly answers why she should join. Kim Kang smiles widely, his eyes closed. Im-zin raised one hand up and pushed away a lock of hair, and with the other hand she hugged herself under her chest. The girl's cheeks turned red, eyes averted to the side in embarrassment. Kim Kang says there will be a lot of model guys there who want to see her. Im-zin asks him what he is talking about. Kim Kang continues to look at the girl over his shoulder and smile. In front of him are the remains of a building and some kind of metal structure. The young man says that he will invite handsome guys. He thinks that it is easy, even too easy. If he persuades her, she will immediately fall for it. The young man glances suspiciously somewhere to the side, his eyes narrowed. Lee-mia stands with her arms crossed over her chest. The jacket slipped down and exposed his shoulders. The girl does not participate in the conversation and seems uninterested. Kim Kang thinks that he has no idea what's on her mind. Lee-mia notices the attention and sharply turns her head towards the young man. And he, on the contrary, turns away from her. Lee-mia asks him a question, as if asking him what he wants from her. The young man denies and says it's nothing. He thinks that he should get to know her better. Kim Henti turns his head back, his eyebrows furrowed in displeasure and his lips pursed tightly. He looks towards the 3 people who are also in monster territory. These are 2 men and a girl. She is dressed in a costume reminiscent of a monastic robe. A man walks ahead with a large scar running across his entire left cheek. To his left is a tall man, his hands bandaged. The man with the scar calls Kim Henti's name, getting his attention. 2 teams have met and stand opposite each other at a distance of several steps. The young man with the scar extends his hand forward, as if offering to shake hands. Kim Henti stands with his hands in his pockets and looks down on his interlocutor. The man with the scar says that they haven't seen each other for a long time and asks how much time has passed since their last meeting in the monster territory. Kim Henti replies that several months have passed. The man with the scar suddenly notices something and looks ahead carefully. He chuckles puzzledly and asks where that guy went. They ask him who he is talking about. Kim Henti turns back and looks at Kim Kang, who is no longer smiling. The young man's eyes are still clear, but there is a strange expression on his face, as if he is perplexed. The man with the scar replies that he is talking about the one who carried their things. Kim Henti continues to stare at Kim Kang, thereby attracting the other team's attention to him. Kim Henti replies that person left their team, and this is a newcomer who recently joined them. Kim Kang-woo replies that he is pleased to meet them, says his name and role. He is a support. Kim Henti looks unhappy and surprised. There are large bruises under the man's eyes. The leader of the opposing team says he's sorry. Kim Henti asks why. The man with the scar remembers being held close by a girl in a monk's robe, and Yoo Jae-han standing in front of them and helping to hold back the blow. The man says that when Yoo Jae-han was in Kim Hyunti's group about a year ago, he did them a great favor. Yoo Jae-han swings both swords at the same time, leaving white marks in the air. The man with the scar says that even when he thinks about it now, he understands that his movements back then were not a joke. It's incredible how he could move so well with such a big bag. Kim Henti looks at the man with the scar with a displeased face. He turns and waves his hand in the air. He asks for Yoo Jae-han's contact if he hasn't joined another guild. Then they will take it for themselves, and finally wishes good luck to the Kim Henti group. The man looks ahead, his cloak fluttering in the wind. The back of the man's head is shaved, and there is thick hair on top. The space around him seemed to be filled with colorful ripples. He asks if that person just called Yoo Jae-han incredible. Kim Kang-woo stands next to the group leader and waves his hand with displeasure. He turned his head slightly to the side, his eyes narrowed. He says that from what he heard, Yoo Jae-han was constantly getting in the way of Kim Henti. Those people overestimated him. Kim Kang-woo slightly opened his eyes and looked ahead in bewilderment. With one hand he was holding onto his bag and waving the other in the air. Large drops of sweat flow down the young man's face. They ask him to give him his sword, and the young man asks in bewilderment in response. Kim Henti stands with his arm outstretched. Behind him there is a tank that is about to deal with the monster. The monster's huge mouth opened over the men. Kim Henti repeats that he needs Kim Kang-woo's sword and demands to give it to him. A bright fiery flash illuminated the space. It rested on the asphalt, striking sparks. Kim Henti holds a huge sword in his hands and flies forward, surrounded by a bright orange flash of light. Kim Henti's eyes glow with a bright red light, and he holds his hand with a sword in front of him. Someone thinks Yoo Jae-han exclaiming his name in his mind. A man in a security guard's uniform stands near the yellow barrier tape and holds his hand up. In his hand is a long red glow stick, which he waves. Many people are moving towards him. The girl asks what's going on. She ran out without her phone and wallet. The man continues to wave his wand in the air, his mouth wide open. He looks serious and focused. Explains that this area has been marked as the territory of Class 4 monsters. Asks people to evacuate quickly. The men flee the area, one holding a small child. The man in the green cardigan says house prices will fall. The man with the child replies that people will lose their homes and asks what it means. The girl wearing a white boot with a blue sole and a young man in black boots are standing next to each other. The girl asks if this is the place. The young man replies that he thinks this is it. Kim Si-hoo is holding a phone in his hands and studying something intently. Yoo Jae-han stands next to her and looks ahead, carefully scanning the territory. He says that this is the territory of the 4th class monsters. It is called the saber-toothed cat. The large animal bears its mouth wide and growls furiously. The cat has huge fangs and claws that she is about to use to attack. This is a 4th class monster, a saber-toothed cat. Yoo Jae-han runs forward, his jacket flapping in the wind due to his speed. A young man holds a sword in front of him. Behind him stands Kim Si-hoo. She extended her staff forward, preparing to cast a spell. Yoo Jae-han shouts the girl's name loudly. Kim Si-hoo looks straight ahead with concentration as blue magic begins to appear around her staff. Kim Si-hoo created 2 magic circles that are directed towards the enemy. Yoo Jae-han runs between the beams of magic. Blue rays hit the cat, causing it to fly into the air. Yoo Jae-han cuts the animal in half with just a movement of his sword. The carcass flies over his head, and the young man himself lands on the ground, resting his sword on it. A young man stands near a defeated cat and holds a sword and its sheath in his hands. Behind him is Kim Sihu, who came closer to the scene of the collision. The girl exhales and says that she thought it was too early for them to go into the territory of fourth-class monsters, but it was much easier than she expected. The type of basilisk they fought was different. The girl came closer to the cut-up cat and carefully looked down at it. Behind her stands Yu Jihan, who is also examining the defeated monster. Kim Sihu asks how they will drag the bodies of the saber-toothed cats to the first floor. Yu Jihan says they need to call the monster processing company. The young man and the girl sharply turn their heads to the side and look there in surprise. Someone screams loudly and asks to save him. Yu Jihan and Kim Sihu run towards where the scream came from. The young man is concentrated and serious. The girl has a slightly anxious expression on her face. She says it looks like there's still someone here who hasn't evacuated. Yu Jihan urges you to save him quickly. He wonders if this voice seems familiar to him. The young man continues to run forward, but he strains to remember whose voice it is. The eyebrows are intricately curved. A drop of sweat runs down the cheek. Yu Jihan and Kim Sihu ran to the place where the scream was heard and stopped. The young man rests his hand on the edge of the wall and screams loudly, notifies that they are members of the Fun Guild and asks if the person who shouted is okay. Chan Sam sits on the floor and screams loudly, streams of tears running down his cheeks. In front of him is a saber-toothed cat, which is about to break through the resistance and grab the guy with its teeth. Kim Sihu and Yu Jihan are watching this from the side. The girl has a smug expression on her face. She has one hand on her side. Yu Jihan looks startled, his mouth wide open. Chan Sam cries and asks to be saved. The guild members exclaim in shock the name of the company owned by Chan Sam. Many dead cats lie on the floor of the building, with pools of blood spreading underneath them. Kim Sihu put her palms together and brought them to her cheek. She smiles widely with her eyes closed, her cheeks glowing a cute pink color. She says sweetly that they met in this place. The girl thinks that it was fate. The next second, Kim Sihu crosses her arms and glares at the guy, her brows furrowed and her mouth wide open. Chan Sam stands on his head in front of her, with his back to the girl. She asks him if he thinks the same way as her. He says that he suddenly felt sick to his stomach and adds that his stomach was very bad then. Kim Sihu is still very angry. She looks at Yu Jihan and shows her fist. The young man crossed his arms over his chest and smiles, looking at the angry girl. He asks if they should end this. They were able to get a good weapon thanks to this guy. Kim Sihu shouts that Yu Jihan is too kind. A young man stands near Chan Sam, who is on the floor. He is on his knees, resting his hands on the floor and raising his head, looking at Yu Jihan. The young man says that since Chan Sam is already here, what does he think about signing a monster processing contract with them? Chan Xuan asks again in shock, as if not believing what he heard. Yu Jihan extends his hand to Jiang Sam with a sweet smile on his face. A golden circle opened behind the young man's back. He says that although they had a rough start, he thinks Chan Sam's abilities are pretty good. The guy thanks him and says that from now on he will work with them. Kim Sihu and Yu Jihan stand nearby and look after the running guy. He does it so quickly that a dusty path is left behind his feet. He asks them to leave the bodies in the building for him. Kim Sihu folded her arms over her chest and narrowed her eyes in displeasure. Yu Jihan stands in front of her and smiles widely, continuing to look in the direction where Chan Sam ran away. Kim Sihu asks the young man what he will do if the owner of the Mountain Company deceives them again. Yu Jihan replies that it's okay, they still need someone like him. Even with the basilisk, he still made sure to collect the loot. Yu Jihan turns his head to the side, a slightly puzzled expression on his face. He continues to say that everything is clear now, but does not have time to finish the sentence. Someone screams and urges the heroes to stop hunting innocent creatures. A man in a black suit with a white shirt and tie holds a microphone in his hands. His other hand is clenched into a fist, which he shakes in the air. The man loudly calls to stop and says that creatures are life that must be respected. He keeps repeating this phrase several times. Kim Sihu and Yu Jihan look in his direction with equally surprised expressions. They both have wide eyes and slightly open mouths. Kim Sihu asks if these are the same people from many people stand on the footpath and hold signs calling for people to stop killing monsters. ICWS is the International Union for the Protection of Creatures. This organization claims that monsters can coexist with people like ordinary plants and animals. Many people run forward, rushing at people with shields. Protesters were holding signs, and some were swinging a cane. This organization has caused enormous damage with its recent protests in the area of monster territory. Kim Sihu looks over her shoulder at Yu Jihan. They are standing near a skyscraper that has not yet collapsed. The girl asks Yu Jihan if he agrees with the opinions of these people. The young man refuses and adds that they are talking nonsense. A man in armor lies under the monster's paw. He clutches the stone in front of him with all his might, trying to escape. Next to him lies a man in a blue suit who cannot be helped. Yu Jihan wonders if those monster defense people would say the same words if they saw monsters killing people right in front of them. A man with a white bandage on his head rests against the shield of one of those holding back the protest. Next to him are several more of the same people. A person from law enforcement agencies asks not to approach. Someone in the crowd exclaims indignantly at this and asks everyone to stick together for the sake of these precious children. People broke through the protection and cordon of law enforcement agencies and broke inside. They quickly run forward, leaving others behind. One of the men shouts that they have broken through, calling on the others to push the guards and enter. The men run up to Yu Jihan and Kim Sihu, who stand in surprise. The girl is slightly behind the young man. She spreads her arms to the sides and opens her mouth and looks at the men. They shout that the heroes are here, they cannot be allowed to leave. Men with various weapons surrounded the young people on all sides. Yu Jihan and Kim Sihu look at them in shock. The young man holds his sword at the ready, his other hand raised to chest level. Even more people crowded around them, looking at the members of the Fun Guild with anger. Yu Jihan looks focused and nervous. He asks what kind of joke is this? 3 people stand near a dead cat and look at it in horror. The girl put her hands to her head, crushing her hair. She makes a strange sound and calls to look at it. The girl knelt down and raised the cat's head towards her with her hands. Tears are flowing down the girl's cheeks. A young man is sitting next to him, who is also crying. The girl screams indignantly. How could people commit such an atrocity to them? She turns to the cats. The young man asks the cat for forgiveness on behalf of all human beings. Kim Sihu and Yu Jihan are standing behind these people. The girl and the young man who hugged the dead cat are aggressively opposed to the heroes. She shouts how can they call themselves heroes after doing this to these cats. The man adds that they are not heroes, but just killers. Yu Jihan anxiously and nervously examines what is happening. He looks concentrated and thinking about something. He thinks that they annoy him. Heroes cannot touch ordinary people. Kim Sihu and Yu Jihan will have to choose whether to resist them until the Hero Association sends help. He did not have time to think of the second option. The young man's eyes are wide open. He is clearly very surprised by something. Someone asks if they can get out of the way. Yundoha stands behind the monster defenders. The man smiles slyly. He is entirely hidden in the shadows, except for his glasses, which reflect the bright light. Yundoha says he has business with Yu Jihan. One of the monster defenders turns back sharply. Anger and indignation are written on his face. He is clearly dissatisfied with the intervention. He asks who Yundoha is. The earth elementalist begins to glow yellow and an aura forms around him. He asks the person a question, as if to make sure that it was asked to him. And he says that he is the one this man hates the most. All the people who surrounded Yu Jihan and Kim Sihu turn towards the new character. Yundoha stands a little distance from them and a huge yellow wall rises behind him. The man smiles widely, looking at these people. He glows yellow all over and exudes power. Yundoha sweetly greets everyone present. This is the scoundrel Yundoha. Yundoha stands with his hands in his pockets, a huge wall rising behind him. The man glows yellow all over. Some people call it the Earth Dragon. Yundoha's hand, which is in his pocket, is very tense and the veins on it are bulging. Some people call him a clown. The man smiles widely, looking straight ahead through the lenses of his glasses. In the west, this man is known as an earthquake. Yundoha is standing on the ground with a small dent formed around his leg. He pushes his glasses up the bridge of his nose with his middle finger. At the same time, the man grins widely, and small pieces of earth fall around him. He says he prefers the nickname Scoundrel. The men from the monster defense look at Yundoha in shock. They look scared. Someone shouts his nickname. The second person asks what the first rank hero forgot here. Yu Jihan looks at everything that is happening with a tired look. His eyelids are slightly open. Beads of sweat run down his cheek and forehead. He thinks about why Yundoha keeps showing up and making a fuss. Does he really have nothing better to do? Yundoha is standing in front of the monster defense people. They are all crowded into a tight pile. Yundoha says now it's time to go back. A wide, satisfied smile shines on the man's face. His glasses hide the expression in his eyes. He adds that he will have to return to hell. A bright yellow flash illuminates the space. Someone makes a sound imitating a cow. Next to the man, a creature bursts out of the ground, all of it covered in small cracks. Yellow light shines through them. Yu Jihan clenches his teeth tightly and looks at the monster in bewilderment. Beads of sweat are running down his face and his brows are furrowed. He thinks about what it is. A huge creature crawled out of the ground and showed its head. 2 huge yellow eyes glow on its face. Yu Jihan guesses that this is the elemental Yundoha. That's right, this creature turns out to be an earth elemental named Mumu. Yundoha stands absolutely calmly next to Mumu. The man has his hands in his pockets. The elemental opened its mouth wide, from which 4 yellow jets flew out. Yundoha ordered Mu to capture them. People in a hurry begin to run away from the yellow rays. Real fear is written on their faces. One of the men makes a strangled sound. Yellow shackles enveloped those who did not have time to escape. They were tied tightly at the arms and legs. Almost all of the monster defenders are suspended in the air by yellow streams of power. Yoon Do-ha stands with his head down. People are hanging right in front of him. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo are also standing on the ground and looking in surprise at the top where people are suspended. They order Yoon Do-ha to be released immediately. Is this how a national hero should behave with civilians? Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo protect themselves from the dust with their hands. They closely watch the suspended people. The girl says it's incredible. Yoo Jae-han looks slightly to the side, sweat running down his cheek. The guy's mouth is twisted into a nervous grin. He thinks that Yoon Do-ha dealt with all the civilians without harming them. His control is incredibly precise. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo turn around in alarm. The girl raised her hand to chest level, sweat running down her cheek and forehead. Someone apologizes for keeping them waiting. Yoon Do-ha stands with his hands in his pockets. He is still wearing light-colored shorts and a snake print shirt. He says that he heard about taking the examination for promotion to the 4th grade. Yoo Jae-han is surprised that he fought such a monster. The young man smiles widely, but a nervous bead of sweat still runs down his cheek. He says that it's all thanks to Yoon Do-ha, because he was the one who assigned him an excellent examiner. Yoon Do-ha walked closer to Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han, the man smiling widely. He placed one hand on his side and spread his legs shoulder-width apart. He laughs and assumes that Yoo Jae-han is talking about Yoon-sik. This guy is a bit short-tempered. The young man thinks that he almost died. Yoon Do-ha looks at the young man with his chin down. He has a wide grin on his face. He says that Yoo Jae-han has become stronger anyway. Yoon Do-ha stands opposite Yoo Jae-han. He is several heads taller than the young man. They both glow with the power of their elemental, as if they are about to fight. Yoon Do-ha says that he wonders which of them will be stronger. Yoon Do-ha looks at the man intensely. He doesn't seem interested at all. The young man's eyebrows are frowned. His gaze is serious. He asks Yoon Do-ha if he came here to talk about it. There are several men standing next to Yoon Do-ha and the Fun Guild. They look at each other, Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han with obvious surprise. Someone from the group of men is surprised that it is Yoon Do-ha and asks what he is doing in the territory of 4th-class monsters. Another person asks what his relationship is with this team. Kim Si-hoo is clearly nervous and a bead of sweat runs down her cheek. She says that there are members of other guilds here. Yoon Do-ha is not embarrassed at all. He continues to smile widely and look at everyone through his glasses. He says there are a lot of extra eyes here, and he suggests moving to another place first. A multi-story building under construction is surrounded by a high fence on which a poster hangs. It says that construction is currently underway, and they apologize for the inconvenience caused. Many people in safety helmets and orange vests walk around the construction site. Standing to the side is a man holding a tablet with documents in his hands. Yoon Do-ha, Kim Si-hoo and Yoo Jae-han approach the construction site. The man walks ahead and greets everyone. The builders look at him enthusiastically. They greet him and ask if he is not working today. Yoon Do-ha replies that it is very tiring. Yoo Jae-han turns his head and looks at everything around him. Yoon Do-ha walks ahead of him and smiles, the man's head slightly turned back. Yoo Jae-han thinks that this is the headquarters of the Dice Guild. There are a lot of people here. Yoon Do-ha says that they are currently working on expanding the underground training complex. Even though it's a little noisy, the man asks for patience. Yoo Jae-han agrees a little nervously. A huge, tall building, illuminated by the sun. The blue sky is reflected from its windows. Yoon Do-ha and the Fun Guild go inside the room. The man walks a little ahead, followed by Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo trailing at the very end. Yoo Jae-han passes through the blue glow that is left behind. The young man turns his head back and looks at this wall of magic. He felt as if he were entering a quiet cafe with no customers. The sounds of construction had completely disappeared. Kim Si-hoo smiles widely and joyfully, stars sparkling in her blue eyes. The girl put her hand to her face, cupping her chin with her fingers. Kim Si-hoo quickly jabbers that it's incredible that they were able to cover such a large building with a magical barrier. They must have borrowed a huge amount of money to build such a larger building and cover it with this giant magical barrier. Everything is done as befits one of the greatest guilds. They spare no expense when it comes to their headquarters. Yoo Jae-han looks at the girl in amazement, his eyes wide open. He asks if it is really that hard to do. Kim Si-hoo agrees, it's hard. The girl stands opposite the young man and points her index finger at him. She is very happy and looks pleased. The young man steps away from the girl to the side and puts his hand forward. It seems to Kim Si-hoo that they spent at least 20 billion on this. Yoo Jae-han exclaims the amount in shock and asks if they really have that much money to spend. Kim Si-hoo stands facing the young man and looks behind him. There is a girl standing there in a white blouse. She is clutching a tablet with documents to her. The girl thanks them for noticing. She smiles widely and raised her hand to her glasses. The girl says that it seems that they were interested in the magical barrier. They almost guessed the price. This girl is the deputy head of the Dice Guild. Her name is Yi Kyung. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-woo look at her with painted faces. They are both drenched in sweat. Yoo Jae-han, startled, asks if this girl is the deputy head of the Dice Guild. Kim Si-woo thought that this was an ordinary secretary. Yoon Do-ha stands next to Yi Kyung, one of his hands in his pocket, the other raised and waving in the air. The man has a wide, joyful smile on his face, just like Yi Kyung's. Yoon Do-ha greets the girl and asks her if she remembers the fun guild they met last time. He asks her to prepare everything for the meeting. The girl says she will prepare everything immediately. Yi Kyung grabbed the man by the cheek and pulled him to the side. Yoon Do-ha waved his hand near his face and opened his mouth wide. Beads of sweat run down his forehead. The girl asks him if he thought she would say that. Next he asks where he went, having forgotten about the schedule. Yoon Do-ha's cheek is swollen and red, and the man is indignant. His deputy is very angry. Steam rises from her head. Yoon Do-ha indignantly asks what she is doing with her guild master. The girl replies that if he is the head, then let him behave appropriately. Kim Si-woo and Yoo Jae-han watch this scene with their mouths slightly open. Beads of sweat are running down their faces and their eyes are wide open. Yoo Jae-han thinks that no matter whether they are outside or inside, it is still smart. Kim Si-woo and Yoo Jae-han sat on the sofa in the head's office. Yoon Do-ha sits next to him in the chair. The man holds a glass of something hot in his hand. Yoon Do-ha relaxed back and threw his arm behind her. A large red bump stands out on the man's cheek. He asks the Fun Guild why they think he brought them here. Yoo Jae-han turned his head to the side, his arms hanging down and his back slightly hunched. A white glow falls on his back. The young man makes the assumption that this may be due to the elemental he possesses. Yoon Do-ha brings the glass to her lips and takes a sip from it. The man says that Yoo Jae-han's guess is correct. A yellow ball appeared above the table near which they were all sitting. It lights up the whole room. A cute yellow dog appears from the table and looks at its owner with its tongue hanging out. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-woo look at her in surprise. The elemental makes a drawn-out sound, consonant with her name. Yoon Do-ha strokes the elemental's head, a slight smile on the man's face. Moo looks halfway out of the table, putting her paws in front of her. Yoon Do-ha tells the elemental to say hello and introduces the puppy. He is the elemental partner of Yoon Do-ha, named Moo. The elemental draws out its name. Yoo Jae-han remembers how the same elemental was next to Yoon Do-ha in the monster territory. Sweat runs down the young man's cheek. Yoon Do-ha asks if they have seen him before. Yoo Jae-han wonders if the difference is too big. The dog sits in front of the owner and looks at him intently. Yoon Do-ha placed one hand on the armrest and the other on his knee. The elemental says that he is helping with construction and has a lot to do. Yoon Do-ha assures him that it will only take a minute. Moo turns towards Yoo Jae-han and looks at him with a benevolent expression on her face. The young man raised his hand and waved his hand at the elemental in greeting. Moo asks if Yoo Jae-han is the guest. A young man greets the elemental. The dog turns his head even more and looks at the man with curiosity. He makes a questioning sound. Kim Si-woo looks at the elemental with delight and tenderness. Hearts fly around the girl. She raised her hands, clenched into fists, to chest level. The girl's cheeks turned red and her eyebrows arched with emotion. Yoo Jae-han extended his hands forward, which Moo sniffed and made sounds at the same time. Yoo Jae-han wonders what he is doing. The girl continues to look at the elementals with emotion and extends her hand in his direction. Yoo Jae-han looked up at Yoon Do-ha and looked at him carefully. Yoon Do-ha asks the young man if he can release his elemental. Yoo Jae-han agrees. The young man raised his hand, palm up, and his elemental appeared on it. The young man looks at him intently. Elemental Yoo Jae-han flew towards Moo. The dog joyfully looks at his relative and says that this is an elemental. Yoon Do-ha watches the elementals without changing his posture. Moo happily looks up, sticking out his tongue. Yoon Do-ha says that as expected, it is a wind elemental. The man asks what his name is. Yoo Jae-han replies that his name is Sylph. Yoon Do-ha smiles slightly. Looking straight, the red bump on his cheek has already disappeared. He says that the Sylph is the reason he wanted to meet them. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-woo stare at the guild master. They look serious and attentive, clearly interested in the conversation. Yoon Do-ha says that the only elemental discovered in their country so far is Moo. And this did not change during the 17 years of his work as an elementalist. Yoon Do-ha looks at the young man through his glasses. The man looks serious. He says that he looked through Yoo Jae-han's hero file, but couldn't find anything related to this elemental. The young man remembers the first time he met Kim Si-woo. He opened the door and entered the room when the girl had her back to him. Yoon Do-ha says that the only time he was suspicious was when he left the Kara's guild and joined the fun. Yoon Do-ha looks intently at the young man. His gaze even expresses a certain threat. He says to draw a conclusion about that. It makes no sense that Yoo Jae-han got an elemental in this guild. Next, the man asks how Yoo Jae-han signed the contract with the Wind Spirit. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-woo look at each other nervously. The girl put her hand to her chest. Drops of sweat run down the young man's face. Yoo Jae-han begins to speak awkwardly, but Kim Si-woo interrupts him and says that she will explain herself. Yoon Do-ha placed both hands on the armrests of the chair and carefully examined the girl. She looks at him, leaning forward a little. Kim Si-hoo says that Sylph had a different owner before. Yoon Do-ha asks about this. The girl looks at the man with an open gaze, not hiding anything. She remembers her mother standing under the full moon. The girl replies that Erna was Sylph's previous owner. This woman is the girl's mother. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo continue to look at the man while sitting on the sofa. They don't look relaxed. No one is leaning on their back. Yoon Do-ha, on the contrary, looks like the master of the situation. The man hums thoughtfully and says that this is how things stand. The man put one hand to his face and rubbed it thoughtfully. He wonders who would have thought that Yoo Jae-han would end up signing a contract with Kim Si-hoo's mother's elemental. This has never happened before. The man's glasses again hide his eyes, but it is clear that his eyebrows are furrowed. Yoon Do-ha thought that when the owner dies, his elemental also disappears. However, it seems that they still do not fully understand everything about the creatures called elementals. The man continues to hold his chin in his hand and rubs it. A thoughtful smile appears on his face. He says that although this did not dispel his doubts, he suggests stopping and getting to the point. Kim Si-hoo looks at the man with excitement, a bead of sweat running down her forehead. She asks him if Sylph is the main reason. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo look at the man's hand intently and anxiously. He extends 2 fingers forward and shows them to them. He agrees with the girl and says that from the very beginning today he wanted to talk about 2 things that they are here for. Yoo Jae-han asks about 2 things. The man raises his hand to his face and adjusts his glasses. His eyes are again hidden, and half of his face is in shadow. Yoon Do-ha asks the guys for permission to be honest with them. The man lowered his hand down and hunched his back. His head was lowered down, and something dark appeared behind his back. He says that as the head of the Dice Guild, he wants to lead their fun guild. Yoo Jae-han and Kim Si-hoo react to this in different ways. The young man does not particularly express his feelings. He continues to look at the man, but with a slightly surprised look. The girl, on the contrary, reacts very vividly. Sweat flows down her face, and her mouth is wide open. She asks the man again in surprise. He smiles widely, showing snow-white teeth. A white light illuminates him from behind. Yoon Do-ha says that he will buy 100% of the shares of the Fun Guild for 20 billion. Kim Si-hoo slams his hands on the table and gets up from the sofa. She looks at the man, who continues to sit calmly in the chair. The girl asks him if he is serious. Yoon Do-ha replies that he would never joke about such things. He can give more if they feel it is not enough. Yoon Do-ha slumped in his chair as if he was very tired. He rests his hands on his hips, and his hands hang down freely. He says they can keep the team of 2 as they are now, or recruit another hero if they want. He will personally teach Yoo Jae-han how to use elementary magic, and he will under no circumstances interfere with the activities of their team. The man sharply raises his head up, a wide smile on his face. The glasses shine brightly with white light. The man asks what they think about it and says it sounds like a good offer. Kim Si-hoo sank back onto the sofa and sat with her back straight. The girl's hands are nervously clenched on her knees. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek and she smiles slightly. Kim Si-hoo says that this is definitely a great offer, but it is too sudden. Yoon Do-ha says he will give them time to think. The man straightened his back and sat with his elbows on the armrests. He has a big smile on his face and looks very confident. The man says that the sooner they answer him, the better. Yoo Jae-han suddenly says that he doesn't want it. Yoon Do-ha's face transforms. His eyebrows are furrowed. His lips are strangely curved. Drops of sweat run down your forehead and cheeks. He clearly didn't expect this and asks again. Yoo Jae-han looks at the man with a confident gaze, his eyelids slightly open. Kim Si-hoo looks at the young man with his mouth wide open in surprise. Yoo Jae-han says that they will never sell the Fun Guild. Something black falls to the ground with force. Chan Same stands with his hand on his hip, his backpack in front of him. The guy looks at the people who are hanging in the air, entangled in earthen bonds. Chang Woo-sang is surprised by what he sees and asks what happened here. The guy put his hand on his backpack and brought the thief to his forehead like a visor. He says that he cleaned everything up and returned, asking where Yoo Jae-han went. The young man clutches some kind of rainbow bundle in his hand. A yellow glow separates from it in different directions. Chan Soon says he was going to brag about finding something amazing.